Tavin Kress, a 15-year-old boy, just slammed into a brutal reality check. Over the past 5 years, he slaved away at the Healers Guild in the sprawling city of Veskir. His rare gift, Verdant Eye, secured him the position by allowing him to identify any plant on site. Being a commoner trapped in a building full of arrogant nobles turned his daily life into a nightmare. The guild bullied him, piled on endless work, and even used him as a human guinea pig for dangerous potion tests. Turning 15 marked the official age of adulthood, sparking a sliver of hope for change. Instead, Guild Chief Harkin Vel fired him on the spot. Harkin had only hired him to comply with government regulations. And now that the boy had reached adulthood, those mandatory rules vanished. To make matters worse, Harkin slapped him with the lowest possible work ratings, making it impossible to find a decent job anywhere else in the city. Tossed into the street with nothing but a meager pile of savings, Tavin realized he was in deep trouble. Both of his parents were long gone, erasing any option of running back home. Becoming an adventurer crossed his mind, though he lacked even basic combat skills. A desperate thought turned to his secret ability: conjuring plants out of thin air using magic. With a mana pool so tiny he could only manifest 3 cheap herbs before collapsing, a new plan formed. Verdant Eye had revealed a hidden property of magical grass, which most people only chew to recover spent magic. Consuming the green stalks while at full power permanently expands your total mana capacity. Expanding his mana would turn Verdant Eye into an absolute goldmine. Desperate to claw his way out of poverty, Tavin marched straight to the Adventurers Guild. Intimidated by the scarred warriors and the rowdy atmosphere, he forced himself up to the counter. He intended to blow his life savings on an escort into the mountains, hoping to gather enough magical grass to alter his fate. Posting the request meant finding guards willing to brave a trip to Mount Colvin. Dropping his name and his past with the Healers Guild made the receptionist's expression freeze over. His ruined reputation had clearly beaten him to the desk. Weakness didn't bar him from acting as a client, so the guild permitted him to post a formal quest. The job required cheap muscle for a 4-day plant-collecting expedition. After a long night in a cheap inn, a vast improvement over his old shed, Tavin returned to the guild, where the receptionist presented 3 options. The Kestrel Accord stood as the first choice, an E-rank squad with D-rank skills, shadowed by a history of bad behavior. Bakudo filled the second slot, a bottom-tier outfit lacking any real reputation. Ashvane completed the list, a rookie team brimming with potential but entirely starved of experience. Balancing his survival against his empty pockets, Tavin selected the Kestrel Accord for their affordable muscle. Signing the contract drained 4 gold coins from his pouch, claiming a full third of his net worth. Recouping that loss required using Verdant Eye to track down rare herbs like lindren weed and angel grass. The rest of his day vanished into purchasing basic supplies: rations, a small shovel, and a rusty dagger. That afternoon brought the young gatherer face to face with his new team. Brenna led the group, a towering, muscular woman sporting a booming voice and striking features. Beside her stood Alric, a handsome blonde man resembling a noble, and Skull, a short, bald fighter with a tangled beard. Professionalism wasn't their strong suit, but they possessed enough grit for the job. The group departed on foot the following morning. Brenna warned him outright: nobody would carry him, and falling behind meant canceling the deal. Leaving the city walls behind stirred a potent mix of nerves and raw excitement in the young herbalist. The treacherous hike represented his singular chance to drag his life out of the mud. Any trace of a serious atmosphere completely vanished 2 hours into the hike. Brenna started belting out an obnoxious tavern song about rabbits on a relentless loop. Her off-key wailing grated against everyone's patience as the miles wore on. Ulrich leaned close, whispering to ask if the endless noise was driving him crazy as well. A quiet nod of agreement came in response, matched by a silent, grimacing nod from Skull. Brenna whipped around with a razor-sharp grin, proving her hearing vastly outmatched their expectations. She called out their cowardly whispering, challenging the men to sing something better if they felt so bored. The sudden confrontation made him jump, his heart racing at being caught, while the others instantly straightened up, pretending they hadn't uttered a single word. Approaching Mount Colvin, Brenna dragged Skull into a screaming sing-off that stretched for miles. Conserving energy meant staying silent. Yet he inevitably found himself roped into the shouting match. By the time the colossal peak of the mountain finally broke through the horizon, the hike had drained him completely, leaving his throat raw from all the shouting. Reaching the base laid bare a terrifying reality. The wilderness here promised far more danger than he ever imagined. Nerves getting the better of him, he begged the Kestrel Accord to push halfway up instead of abandoning him at the bottom. Annoyance flashed across Brenna's face, though Ulrich and Skull voiced their support, having taken a liking to the kid. Brenna eventually caved, punctuating her agreement by punching Skull for bringing up an old nickname. Scaling the slope triggered a relentless onslaught, as goblins, kobolds, and killer hornets swarmed them from every direction. Brenna unleashed her true power, swinging a massive greatsword so fast the monsters never stood a chance. Ulrich explained she used to be a top-tier A-rank adventurer, until her old group kicked her out for her temper. That explained why Tavin was traveling with someone far deadlier than a standard low-rank escort. To mess with her teammates, Brenna cheerfully dragged a horde of goblins toward Ulrich and Skull, forcing the two men to fight, while she scooped Tavin up and sprinted away. The pair soon reached a quiet clearing halfway up the mountain. Exhausted from the run, Brenna flopped onto the dirt and fell instantly asleep, leaving the others to stand guard. While the warrior snored, Tavin slipped away to harvest herbs. His verdant eye allowed him to identify any plant on the mountain just by touching or tasting it. After plucking several common healing stalks, he stumbled upon something incredible: iron root. This rare herb could permanently harden a person's muscles. Most adventurers considered the legendary plant nothing more than a myth. With Brenna still dead to the world, Skull offered to guard Tavin deeper into the woods. The bearded mercenary relied on his old thief skills to detect and bypass wandering monsters, making the trek safe. Tavin stripped the brush quickly, pulling in a haul worth over a gold coin in a matter of hours. The sheer volume impressed Skull, since the young gatherer had already paid off the cost of his escort. Approaching the clearing again, a heavy tension settled over the air. The copper scent of blood made Tavin brace for a fight, though Skull calmly waved him off. A monster hadn't ambushed the camp. Brenna had simply woken up, and the entire campsite was now painted with the remains of the beasts she had slaughtered in their absence. Skull muttered a quick warning that while the woodland creatures were dead, a grumpy and fully awake Brenna posed the real threat to their safety now. The towering woman stood drenched in blood from head to toe, laughing off the carnage. She rested her boots beside a massive 3-meter carcass she had just butchered solo. Stepping into the clearing, Tavin and Skull froze in absolute shock. In a fantastic mood, Brenna announced dinner was served and ordered Ulrich and Skull to drain the carcass while she washed up. Ulrich had hidden in the trees during the entire massacre, knowing one stray hit from Brenna's blade would kill him. The blonde archer sighed and drew his knife. Tavin pitched in as well, eager to avoid being left alone with the warrior woman. Carving the beast yielded prime cuts of meat, leading to a massive campfire barbecue. Brenna devoured an ungodly amount of food, forced extra portions onto Tavin, and kept the camp roaring with laughter. Staring into the fire, Tavin realized he hadn't felt this relaxed in years. Morning arrived, bringing a brutal stomachache from the endless roasted meat. Empty ale bottles littered the dirt around Brenna, who remained dead to the world beside the ashes. Tavin slipped out of his bedroll and found Ulrich and Skull already awake and scrubbing the gear. Trading guard duties, Ulrich shadowed the young gatherer through the mountain brush. Tavin soon unearthed the second iron root, securing another permanent strength boost in his pouch. Eager to test the effects himself, he packed it away carefully. His rapid harvesting pace shocked Ulrich. So Tavin explained the secret was his rare tier gift, the verdant eye. Returning to camp, they found Brenna aggressively chasing Skull through the trees with a wooden training sword. Spotting Tavin, she dropped the weapon and bounded over cheerfully. Lunch became another mandatory meat gorge. The hungry warrior polished off the entire remaining pile of bear meat, then dashed into the woods to hunt fresh prey, never waiting for Tavin to decline her offer for seconds. Ulrich and Skull shot the boy sympathetic looks, warning him that Brenna had taken a liking to him, and there was zero escape now. Skull joked that throwing a punch might scare her off, though everyone knew Tavin would die trying. Brushing off the warning, Tavin returned to the wilderness with Skull watching his back. He easily cleared his goal of 4 gold coins during that single trip, and simply stopped counting. Evening brought Brenna back dragging a massive deep boar. Another monstrous feast kicked off, and once again Tavin stuffed himself until he collapsed, spending the entire night groaning on the dirt floor. Their third day on Mount Colvin passed just as smoothly as the second. Tavin packed away his final harvest and endured yet another massive meat feast hosted by Brenna. Despite his screaming stomach, he refused to turn down the imposing woman's generosity. Growing up poor meant wasting food went against his very nature. By nightfall, he held double his expected harvest and felt a genuine bond forming with the Kestrel Accord. Ulrich and Skull had watched his back from the start, and despite Brenna being painfully loud and intense, Tavin recognized her protective nature. Later that night, the mercenary leader approached his bedroll with an unusually calm expression. She admitted the escort mission had been a rare stretch of fun for her. The quiet mood shattered when she confessed that her group, the Kestrel Accord, was being forced out of the city of Veskir. Her long-standing feud with her former A-rank party had finally pushed the local Adventurers Guild to expel her completely. Since the guild prioritized high-ranking members, Brenna's group took the fall. Taven felt crushed to lose the first friends he could truly trust. Brenna slapped his shoulder and told him not to mope, reminding him they were only banned from the guild, not the city. She challenged him to grow stronger so they could meet again as equals. The next morning, Taven bid farewell to Alric and Skull. The mercenaries hated to leave, admitting he was the first client who ever treated them with genuine respect. After a final trip up Mount Colvin to gather herbs, the group headed back to Veskir. The descent felt far shorter now that they walked as comrades. At the city gates, Taven delivered a heartfelt speech about how they changed his life and promised to track them down. Brenna put on a tough front and ordered him to stop being embarrassing, though her warm eyes betrayed her. Once Taven passed through the gates, the Kestrel Accord trio headed to the guild to finalize their paperwork. As usual, rival adventurers threw insults their way, but the mercenaries ignored the noise. Upon receiving their payment, the receptionist handed over an extra pouch. Inside, Taven had packed a gift of choice medicinal herbs alongside a beautiful bouquet. The three hardened fighters smiled, deeply touched by the boy's kindness. Meanwhile, back at the Healers Guild, Harkin lived like a king 3 days after firing Taven. He celebrated his decision by sipping expensive tea and laughing over ruining the peasant's life. The guild chief even considered hiring more commoners just to savor the thrill of firing them later. His celebration crashed to a halt when an employee burst into the office in a sheer panic. A new potion batch sent to the royal family had backfired horribly. The brew left several nobles unconscious and in critical condition, and the disaster extended far beyond the palace. Reports flooded in from patients everywhere, falling violently ill from their medicine, leaving Harkin furious and confused. He designed the recipe perfectly, using a toxic plant that should have neutralized into a healing agent. He failed to grasp how such a catastrophic mistake slipped through now that his pristine team worked without Taven. He failed to realize how much he relied on Taven's unique skill to spot tiny defects in the plants. Without verdant eye to catch the mistakes, his perfect team was accidentally brewing pure poison. As his empire crumbled, Harkin scrambled to contain the royal disaster he engineered. Losing his mind, he slammed his fists against the desk, completely powerless to stop the fallout. His guild was once renowned for supplying the finest potions in the entire kingdom. Now it faced a catastrophic public disaster thanks to his botched new formula. Struggling to maintain his composure, he ordered the healers to investigate the fatal error. He stubbornly convinced himself that a single mistake would never ruin his grand reputation. He took comfort in knowing he already kicked out the incompetent peasant he blamed for all his problems. Harkin marched toward the capital, armed with heavy bribes and slick excuses. Confident he could fix this, he remained completely blind to the fact that without Taven, his high-quality potions were gone for good. The guild's success was about to plummet. Meanwhile, Taven returned to Veskir after 4 grueling days on Mount Colvin. Exhausted but brimming with pride, he hauled a bag stuffed with valuable herbs. Spending time around hardened mercenaries cured his fear of the rowdy crowd at the Adventurers Guild. He officially reported his quest complete and asked the receptionist where to sell his harvest. Even with the guild claiming a 10% cut, Taven chose to sell right there to avoid any shops tied to Harkin. He also prepared a generous gift of high-quality herbs for the party that protected him. Feeling too shy to hand it over directly, he chose to leave the bundle at the desk. Back at a cheap inn, Taven fought off sleep to sort his massive haul. A freezing shower snapped him out of his exhaustion before he dumped the plants across the floor. The earthy smell filled the room, and the final count exceeded his wildest hopes. After hours of meticulous sorting, he calculated his collection at over 10 gold coins. That total more than doubled his protection fee, giving him the first real glimpse of a solid future. However, his physical weakness remained a glaring flaw. To survive men like Harkin, he needed raw strength. He finally pulled out the rare ironroot weed he discovered and decided to eat it. The bitter, numbing taste was absolutely vile, sending him writhing in pain across the floor. When he finally pushed himself up, he felt completely unchanged. His arms remained just as thin, packing no extra muscle whatsoever. He guessed the herb's effect was either incredibly minor or simply needed time to manifest. Disappointed but far from defeated, he collapsed into a deep sleep, waking the next morning refreshed and ready. He marched straight to the Adventurers Guild to offload the lower quality herbs and fund some mana-boosting grass. A friendly bald staff member met him at the counter, completely shocked by the sheer volume of his harvest. Given the massive haul, the clerk warned that pricing would take time and suggested taking a seat or returning later. Taven chose to wait, fully aware this transaction marked the first true step toward his new life. After finishing his business at the Adventurers Guild, Taven decided to hunt down a rumored shop called Amberleaf. During his days at the Healers Guild, he remembered this place as the only supplier capable of providing top-tier herbs on short notice. Carrying a fresh batch of high-grade plants, Taven hoped the shop owner would spot their true value. The storefront sat near the edge of Veskir, surprisingly cramped but radiating a wonderful scent. Instead of the harsh sting of medicinal weeds, a sweet, calming fragrance filled the air. Behind the counter stood the shopkeeper, an elderly elf named Malin Thorn with a gentle face. But the moment Taven offered to sell his harvest, her welcoming demeanor vanished. The old elf locked eyes with him, delivering a stern warning that she only dealt in top-tier goods. Should he present her with garbage, she threatened to fine him simply for wasting her time. Taven stood his ground, watching Malin carefully test his herbs by snapping a stem to taste the raw sap. Impressed, she admitted these specimens easily outclassed the stock from her private suppliers. While the elf slipped into the back room to finalize her count, the young gatherer browsed the displays. A stalk of rare immunity grass sat behind glass, priced at 1 platinum coin, a staggering fortune. Scanning the shelves for ironroot, he asked Malin about it, but the name drew a blank. She guessed the locals probably just sold that specific herb under the name bitterweed. Returning to the counter, she slid 1 gold and 8 silver coins his way. A massive, shocking payout. Premium stock commands a premium price, she explained, and she knew exactly how to find the right buyers. Overcome with gratitude, the boy nearly bowed until his forehead touched the floorboards. Hearing the name Taven Cress, Malin realized this was the very gatherer the Healers Guild had just fired. Fortunately, she despised Harkenvel with a passion and immediately declared herself an ally. The old woman even joked about fencing garbage to the guild, now that their best appraiser was gone. Spirits lifted and his coin pouch comfortably heavy, Taven offered his thanks and stepped back into the street. Escaping Harkin's suffocating grip made the entire world feel vibrant and full of opportunity. Discovering decent people outside the guild fueled a burning drive to grow stronger and see the realm. His next stop was the Adventurers Guild to collect payment for the mid-grade haul he had dropped off earlier. The final total hardly mattered anymore. Not after scoring such a massive windfall at Amberleaf. Navigating the rowdy tavern hall felt easier this time, his newfound confidence acting like a shield. The bald clerk from earlier emerged from the back room, carrying Taven's emptied satchel and a ledger. A flutter of nerves hit the boy as the worker flipped open the book to reveal the appraisal value. The numbers were staggering. 5 gold and 7 silver coins sat cleanly on the counter. That payout easily covered his living expenses without forcing him to pawn off his magical grass. Securing his finances meant he could consume the enchanted plants himself to skyrocket his magic power. One glaring problem remained. Raw magical grass tastes like absolute poison. Forcing down even a single plain leaf felt like chewing on dry, intensely bitter ash. Hoping to mask the vile flavor, Taven swung by the market stalls to grab milk and honey. Pride swelled in his chest as he patted a coin pouch that had ballooned from 2 gold to nearly 10. Strolling past a merchant stand, a massive pair of arms suddenly locked around Taven in a crushing bear hug. His attacker was Brenna, the towering, boisterous warrior from the Kestrel Accord. Trailing right behind her were her trusted mercenary partners, Ulrich and Skull. Mud-splattered and sporting fresh bruises from a recent hunt, the trio radiated victorious energy. Skull cracked a joke at Taven's expense, earning him and Ulrich a playful, bone-rattling punch from Brenna. Watching the hardened mercenaries bicker like siblings brought a genuine smile to the boy's face. Excusing himself from the chaos, Taven hurried back to the inn to face his grueling botanical feast. Locking his bedroom door, he stared down a daunting pile of 142 portions of raw grass. Shredding the leaves and chugging water barely helped. The sheer bitterness flooded his mouth like venom. An hour of agonizing chewing only eliminated 6 stalks, leaving him gagging and utterly demoralized. Folding the herbs into standard rations only managed to ruin the good food, amplifying the foul taste. Tossing a few sprigs onto a skillet released a stench so noxious the innkeeper pounded on his door. Blending the leaves into a thick paste of cowbird milk and killer bee honey proved the only viable method. Sunset marked a grim milestone. 50 portions choked down, one agonizing spoonful at a time. Bile rose in his throat, and his stomach churned violently. Yet the teenager refused to quit. Desperate for proof that this torture worked, he channeled his mana to synthesize medical herbs. His old limits were strict. 3 conjured plants would drain his core and leave him gasping on the floor. Tonight, 6 fully formed plants bloomed in his hands before the fatigue hit. proving his capacity had doubled. For 4 grueling days, the young gatherer waged war against the remainder of the bitter stockpile. The strict herbal diet ravaged his digestion, leaving him malnourished and battling constant sharp cramps. Enduring the agony paid off. By the time the final leaf vanished, his mana reserves had surged tremendously. Scraping his tongue, he swore to learn alchemy rather than grazing on raw foliage like farm cattle. Stomach settling and power amplified, Tavin marched back through the heavy oak doors of the Adventurers Guild. The time had come to contract a fresh escort for another dangerous ascent up Mount Colvin. Hiring Brenna's crew was off the table, as the Kestrel Accord were already packing their gear to leave Veskir. Pinning a parchment to the board, he posted an open bounty for a 4-day expedition, offering 4 gold coins. Back at the inn, Tavin ran one final test of his new limits. Measuring his magic with medicinal herbs as a base unit, his previous limit was 3. After the first day of eating, that number doubled to 6. By the time he choked down the last of the high-quality grass, he managed to synthesize 14 herbs before collapsing from exhaustion. The grueling work had paid off, leaving his magical reserves nearly 5 times larger than before. Surviving 4 days on a diet of foul-tasting magical grass, the young herb gatherer pushed his total magic capacity to 14, with his stomach finally settling. A rare wave of energy washed over him. Heading to the Adventurers Guild early to dodge the morning rush, he checked his request for a Mount Colvin escort. The receptionist offered 3 choices, starting with Umbrella, an E-rank party known for being steady but unexceptional. Next up was Ashvane, a rookie F-rank squad boasting a surprisingly high success rate. The final option was Pale Hounds, a D-rank crew fresh off a promotion. They carried a steep price tag and bore the stigma of failing their exams twice. Wanting the extra muscle, Tavin hired them anyway, gladly paying the 4 gold coins. With time to kill before their meeting, he treated himself to a hot meal and stocked up on supplies, grabbing leather armor, a fresh dagger, and vials of slime liquid. Noon arrived, but the Pale Hounds never showed, leaving him waiting at the guild until sunset. At long last, 4 men wearing white headbands strolled in, laughing loudly among themselves. They had deliberately stalled, placing bets on whether their client would stick around. Their obnoxious attitude instantly made Tavin miss the sharp professionalism of the Kestrel Accord. Swallowing his frustration, he confirmed their contract, agreeing to set out at dawn. Returning to his room, the teenager ran a few experiments with his verdant eye. Synthesizing a single blade of magical grass, he realized, drained 3 points of magic. Crafting 4 of them knocked him out cold, yet he woke up feeling prepared. The following morning brought immediate disaster. The Pale Hounds dragged their feet down the trail, completely ignoring requests to pick up the pace. Night had already fallen by the time they reached the base of Mount Colvin, yet the mercenaries chose to push upward. Though capable enough in a fight, the group lacked any teamwork, wasting their breath bragging about easy kills. Without warning, a suffocating presence froze them all in their tracks. A massive, enraged wolf, a beast that rarely left the summit, blocked their path. Panic seized the mercenaries, and instead of holding the line, their leader ordered his men to scatter, leaving their client as bait. The so-called professionals vanished into the tree line in seconds. Left entirely alone, the boy watched the monster circle him with a low growl. Terror paralyzed him so completely that his dagger slipped from his grip. Certain he was about to die, a sudden realization hit him. Remembering the sheer agony of forcing down all that magical grass, he refused to let his journey end here. Snapping out of his daze, a desperate plan formed in his mind. Channeling his magic, he conjured a blade of magical grass and a stalk of bomb grass right into his palm. Crushing his fist shut, he triggered the explosive plant. The detonation seared his skin, sending a jolt of pain that sharpened his focus. He refused to become wolf bait without throwing a punch. Combining the heat of the blast with the magical grass, a cloud of nauseating smoke erupted, carrying a stench so foul it turned his own stomach. Caught dead center in the noxious cloud, the raging beast collapsed into the dirt, howling in agony, its terrifying roar reduced to a pathetic whimper. Knowing the makeshift smoke bomb wouldn't buy him much time, Tavin moved. Drawing a vial of slime liquid steeped in toxic angel grass, he hurled it forward. The glass shattered squarely against the creature's forehead. For a split second, the monster stayed still, until the venom started eating through its flesh. The wolf thrashed madly, scrubbing its burning head against the ground as Tavin snatched up his dagger and charged. Seizing the opening, he buried the steel deep into the animal's throat. Thrashing wildly, the beast tried to escape, But blinded and deprived of its scent, its strength bled out into the soil until it finally stopped moving. Taven stood over the carcass, his hands shaking in disbelief at his own victory. Knowing the mountain remained crawling with threats, he abandoned the idea of harvesting the pelt. Finding a sturdy tree nearby, he scrambled high into the branches to wait out the dark. Dawn broke over the canopy, revealing a grim truth. He was completely lost. The pale hounds were long gone, and nobody was coming to look for him. Banking on a rescue, he decided to hole up in the branches for 2 days, stretching out his meager rations. Forcing himself to stay alert, the gatherer occupied his time by cataloging the nearby foliage. His burned magical grass proved to be an excellent monster repellent, while those toxic slime vials served as his primary weapons. By the time the second night fell, exhaustion was taking its toll. Desperate to avoid plummeting from the canopy in his sleep, he chewed on bitter magical roots to keep his eyes open. Without warning, the forest erupted into chaos. Monsters scattered in all directions as something massive tore through the woods, slaughtering everything in its path. Shrinking back against the bark, he prayed the apex predator wouldn't notice him as heavy footsteps stopped directly beneath his branch. Taven held his breath, bracing for the end, until a very familiar voice cut through the dark. It was Brenna. Flooded with relief, the teenager scrambled down the trunk and threw his arms around the mercenary woman. She swatted them away with forced gruffness, telling the boy to quit acting like a baby. But she let the boy hop onto her back to carry him to safety. Rewinding to that morning, Brenna had woken up in a foul mood. She led the Kestrel Accord alongside Ulrich and Skoll. Inside the Adventurers Guild, she spotted the Pale Hounds, the very mercenaries who had abandoned Taven. Those thugs immediately mocked her party as outcasts, but Brenna refused to endure their insults. Grabbing their leader, she delivered a brutal punch that shattered his nose. 2 more members went down to a vicious slam and a high kick, collapsing unconscious onto the floor. Right before she could finish off the final thug, Skoll intervened. He reminded her she had inflicted enough damage and needed to focus on finding Taven. Prying the truth from the survivors, an enraged Brenna sprinted toward the mountain to bring the boy home. She had been so distracted beating down the Pale Hounds that she nearly forgot to ask where they left Taven. Ulrich, her level-headed companion, had to physically restrain her from delivering a fatal blow. Trembling in fear, one of the thugs finally confessed they lost sight of Taven on Mount Colvin and simply returned without him. The coward tried lying, claiming they intended to report the incident, but Brenna and Ulrich saw right through it. These mercenaries had lounged around, chatting, while their young client remained stranded. Armed with the truth, Brenna unleashed a devastating technique called the Strike of the Fire Dragon, hitting the thug, striking him with a fire-infused punch that inflicted severe burns. She then inflicted the exact same punishment on the rest of the group to ensure they learned their lesson. Her companions, Ulrich and Skoll, urged Brenna to head for the mountain immediately while they handled the guild paperwork. Brenna sprinted for 3 hours straight, driven by a desperate gut feeling that she had to save the boy. Shadows lengthened into darkness by the time she finally reached Mount Colvin. Trusting her sharp senses and intuition, she eventually caught Taven's scent and spotted him hiding high in a tree. When Taven saw Brenna, he completely broke down in tears and hugged her tightly. Terrified by the roaming monsters, he truly believed he would never see home again. Brenna put on a tough act, commanding the boy to stop crying, but seeing Taven so utterly distressed made her own heart ache. She carried the exhausted teenager all the way back to town on her back, even though her own legs bled from dozens of cuts earned during the frantic search. The next morning, after Taven woke in a comfortable inn room Brenna had paid for, the two talked. Brenna told Taven he needed to stop being so hard on himself. The blame fell entirely on the Pale Hounds for abandoning him. Before parting ways, Brenna promised to settle the score with those thugs for good. Taven marched directly to the Adventurers Guild to file an official report. Horrified by his harrowing story, the receptionist immediately summoned the guild chief. To Taven's surprise, the chief turned out to be the exact same bald man who had helped him sell herbs earlier. The chief refused to take the situation lightly, explaining that abandoning a client went far beyond a simple mistake. The guild treated such a betrayal as severely as attempted murder. He assured Taven the authorities would arrest and punish every single member of the Pale Hounds. Hearing such severe consequences left Taven completely shocked, yet a massive weight lifted off his shoulders, reassuring him he was finally safe. With the mercenaries facing prison time, the chief shifted the discussion to how the guild would make amends. Leaving someone behind as monster bait constituted a severe crime, bordering on attempted murder. Taven sat there stunned. Years of enduring abuse at the Healers Guild had left him numb to being a scapegoat. He realized that if he still worked under Harkenvel, his former teammates would likely have earned praise for ditching him to die. The chief assured Taven he bore no blame and promised to assign him a top-tier party for future quests. As a formal apology, the guild waived all his future fees and awarded him a staggering 20 gold coins in compensation. Tavan beamed with thrill, though the chief found his polite gratitude unsettling given his recent ordeal. Hoping to stick with familiar faces, Tavan asked to hire the Kestrel Accord again, but the chief revealed they were already leaving Veskir to start fresh in a new city. A bitter rivalry with a high-ranking party named Sunspire had caused them endless trouble here. Stepping away from the reception desk, Tavan felt true relief wash over him. Even though his hands remained burned from the recent battle, he possessed both wealth and safety. Utterly exhausted from the mountain ordeal, he returned to his inn room and slept for days. Over the following 3 days, Tavan spent all his time hanging out with the Kestrel Accord before their departure. The mercenaries dragged him shopping, invited him to raucous drinking parties, and showed him around the city. Skull, their sturdy warrior, guided him toward a hidden magic shop, while Ulrich, the stylish member, marched him straight into a high-end clothing store. The trio even squeezed in a brutal crash course in sword fighting. While Ulrich and Skull proved to be excellent teachers, Brenna remained the group's powerful but strict leader. The lessons mostly relied on strange sound effects and sharp gestures, making them tough to follow but incredible to watch. Tavan arrived at the city gates to see the mercenaries off on the morning of their departure. Brenna stayed unusually quiet and refused to meet his gaze, forcing the boy to pass his parting gift through Ulrich. As the group started down the dirt road, the young gatherer mustered his courage and shouted at the top of his lungs. He thanked Brenna for saving his life and swore to grow strong enough to join her party one day. Without turning around, Brenna offered a firm thumbs up, a gesture Ulrich explained was just her acting shy. Watching them vanish over the horizon, Tavan realized his life had finally taken a turn for the better. Back in the city, however, chaos had completely overtaken the Healers Guild. Harkenvel, the arrogant guild chief, stood on the verge of a complete breakdown. Ever since he exiled Tavan, every new potion brewed at the guild ended in failure, baffling the remaining staff. To pile on to the disaster, elite adventure parties had started canceling their standing contracts one by one. Furious, Harken blamed everyone but himself, tearing at his own hair and throwing violent tantrums in his office. Malin Thorn dropped off a fresh batch of herbs, only to mock the chief's incompetence, noting how the stress had rapidly aged him. Right as the chief neared his breaking point, a royal messenger strode through the guild doors. Harken drained of color, realizing he had blown all his funds on useless bribes and overpriced ingredients. Now he lacked anything of value to offer the crown to mask his string of miserable failures. This singular moment marked the undeniable end of his tyrannical leadership. Returning to the morning of the departure, Brenna had struggled with her own heavy heart at the inn. She had grown deeply fond of the boy and desperately wanted him in the Kestrel Accord, yet couldn't find the words to ask. Skull relentlessly teased her about going soft, forcing the warrior to hide behind her usual aggressive scowl. Despite the bittersweet farewell, both knew their paths would cross again once Tavan proved his mettle in the wild. Packs strapped and weapons secured, the Kestrel Accord prepared to march out of Veskir. Brenna feigned impatience and barked orders, though everyone saw right through her attempt to mask her emotions. Just as Ulrich finalized their exit paperwork at the gate, Tavan rushed up for a final farewell. The boy carried small parting gifts to thank the mercenaries for keeping him alive on the mountain. Refusing to meet his gaze, Brenna stubbornly stared away because she was fighting a losing battle against her own tears. She hung back and pretended to be utterly annoyed, while Ulrich graciously accepted the wrapped packages. Brenna realized the young gatherer was the first person to treat her like a human being instead of a bloodthirsty monster. That simple kindness meant everything to her. And as they finally marched away, tears broke through her tough exterior. Right as the distance grew, Tavan cupped his hands and shouted a massive, heartfelt thank you. He swore across the open road that he would forge his strength and join their ranks one day. Hearing the promise, Brenna shot a silent thumbs up into the air, far too choked up to voice a reply. Miles down the dirt road, the seasoned mercenaries finally unpacked the boy's parting gifts. Skull unwrapped a pair of high-quality leather gloves. Ulrich found a rare crafting material, and Brenna, whose real name was, surprisingly, Ilsa, pulled out a cute red hair clip she had secretly admired in the market. The incredibly thoughtful presents brought genuine smiles to their faces, lifting the entire party's spirits for the long march. Waking up the next morning, Tavan fought off a wave of loneliness, grounding himself in the promise he had made. He burned through the early hours running sword drills before marching straight to the Adventurers Guild. Returning to Mount Colvin was his only option for gathering the magical herbs required to expand his verdant eye. Remembering how terribly his previous escorts had treated him, he felt a knot of anxiety about hiring a new team. Thankfully, the local guild chief had waived all future booking fees and handpicked a roster of reliable mercenaries. The receptionist laid out 3 options: a flawless D-rank squad, a veteran mentor named Garrick, and an F-rank rookie party named Ashvane. Remembering how consistently the 4 young adventurers had tried to take his requests in the past, Tavin selected Ashvane. The incredibly low cost of hiring the rookie party left him genuinely stunned. To make up for the cheap rate, he planned to pay them a hefty bonus for a job well done. Setting their departure time for noon, the boy hurried into the bustling market to restock his supplies. He packed away fresh food and water, along with acidic slime liquid to craft shatter jars for self-defense. His final stop was Anvil Rest, a dusty weapons shop Brenna had highly recommended before she left. After bleeding out in the dirt on his last run, Tavin knew he could no longer rely entirely on his escorts. Surviving the mountain meant wielding his own blade and wearing his own iron. Pushing open the heavy wooden door, a thick stench of hot iron and dried blood instantly washed over him. Scuffed breastplates and sharpened weapons littered every inch of the counter. Yet the shopkeeper was completely missing. The moment his fingers brushed the hilt of a strange blade, a furious roar rattled the back room. A short, incredibly hairy old man charged out, swinging a heavy forge hammer, screaming at the boy to back away. Tavin threw his hands up to prove he wasn't stealing, shouting over the noise that he only wanted to buy a sword. Hearing the jingle of coin, the blacksmith named Boric dropped his weapon and erupted into a booming laugh. The old man apologized for the scare and completely flipped his mood, cheerfully slapping the gatherer across the back. Mentioning Brenna's recommendation only fueled the blacksmith's excitement, revealing the 2 tough warriors were old drinking buddies. Boric dug through his inventory to find a razor-sharp steel longsword and a fitted metal chest plate. The armor proved incredibly light, yet durable, and the smith even threw in a massive discount alongside a free leather scabbard. Tavin left the shop in high spirits, determined to swing a sword with the same brutal efficiency as Brenna. Heading straight for the Adventurers Guild, he prepared to meet the new mercenary team escorting him up Mount Colvin. This party went by the name Ashvane, composed of 4 young adventurers right around his own age: Kale, Nessa, Dax, and a painfully timid girl named Ren. Nessa practically buzzed with energy, thrilled that Tavin had finally accepted their posting. Kale acted as their grounded leader, contrasting sharply with the slacker Dax, while Ren barely spoke a word, but the rest of the team quickly boasted about her unique anti-heal skill that made her their absolute best asset. Everyone spent a comfortable hour trading stories and getting acquainted. Sharing the exact same age bracket gave the meeting a relaxed, casual tone, totally unlike Tavin's rigid dealings in the past. Before parting ways, they locked in plans to meet up at dawn for the climb. Safely locked in his inn room, Tavin decided to test the outer limits of his verdant eye. Conjuring a single blade of angel grass violently drained his magic reserves, leaving him gasping and exhausted on the floor. Pushing through the fatigue the next morning, he ran through a few basic sword drills down in the dirt courtyard. Mid-swing, he caught sight of a striking blue-haired woman in heavy plate armor, silently analyzing his form. She carried the heavy, intimidating aura of a high-ranking knight of the Royal Order, someone dwelling entirely out of his social league. Any desire to speak with her crumbled against his own lack of nerve, and soon he had to leave to meet Ashvane. Finding the party waiting early, Tavin listened to Nessa and Kale playfully bickering, feeling instantly at home. Everyone quickly voted to ditch the stiff mercenary formalities and just stick to first names. Despite blushing furiously, even Ren managed to squeak out permission for Tavin to use her given name. Spirits soaring and gear double-checked, the 5 youths marched out toward the wilderness. Hiking the dirt roads toward Mount Colvin, the members of Ashvane opened up about their collective past. Ren, Nessa, Kale, and Dax had actually forged their bond as students inside a prestigious military academy. Some shadowy, unspoken incident had ultimately resulted in Ren facing an entirely unfair expulsion. Refusing to abandon their friend, the other 3 threw away their academic futures just to follow her out the door. That fierce loyalty dragged the quartet all the way down to Veskir to carve out a living hunting monsters. Nessa and Kale had both cleared the strict academy entrance exams through sheer, ordinary hard work. Academy scouts, meanwhile, had specifically handpicked Ren and Dax just to exploit their incredibly rare skills. Hearing these warm tales of academy life made Tavin's grueling 5 years under Hark and Vel seem even worse. Though the misery wasn't completely pointless, those brutal shifts had sharpened his botanical eye and forged the exact mental armor he relied on today. Reaching the foothills, Ashvane joked about a botched water-carrying quest before finally asking why a normal guy needed an armed escort up these trails. Their confusion only spiraled upon learning the sole objective was picking wild plants. Hiring 4 trained combatants for a simple foraging trip seemed like a devastatingly quick way to go bankrupt. Dax wisely advised pushing up into the middle elevations before chatting further, warning that the lower slopes crawled with beasts. A sudden ambush from a pack of kobolds and werewolves interrupted the climb, giving Ashvane a stage to display flawless teamwork. Nessa and Kale locked down the front line, leaving Dax and Rin to guard the rear, where the shy healer immediately stole the spotlight. Blasting a kobold backward with sheer magic, she launched a brilliant arcing shot straight over Kale's shoulder to blindside a charging werewolf. The timid, stuttering girl evaporated in combat, replaced instantly by a cold and highly competent battlefield commander. Securing a quiet, defensible clearing beside a running stream, the party finally dropped their packs to pitch camp. Messa and Rin handled the canvas tents, freeing up Kale and Dax to escort Tavin deeper into the brush. Trudging through the dense foliage, Dax casually revealed his true class as a dedicated buff mage. This rare specialization meant he completely skipped offensive spells, choosing instead to cripple enemies and amplify his allies' raw power. Gathering proceeded at a blistering pace, packing Tavin's satchel to the brim with medical foliage in barely half an hour. Kale stared in absolute shock, totally baffled by how anyone could distinguish a priceless root from common dirt in a fraction of a second. Hiding it felt pointless now, so Tavin confessed his trump card, a rare gift known as Verdant Eye, granting him instant botanical appraisal. Recognizing the sheer gold value of that ability, Dax practically begged for a permanent slot in Tavin's party. The offer tempted him, but Tavin's heart remained locked on earning a place beside Brenna. Instead, he pitched a counteroffer, an exclusive long-term contract securing Ashvane as his permanent escort for every future harvest. He backed the deal up with a staggering guaranteed wage of 4 solid gold coins per mission. That number made Dax cheer with absolute glee, though Kale still squinted, trying to comprehend the profit margins. Sunset marks the end of a genuinely massive harvest, yielding over 100 standard herbs, several rarities, and, crucially, a brand new stock of the wildly elusive iron root. Holding 2 intact stalks of the strength-boosting plant proved this entire expedition a resounding triumph. Sorting through the gathered piles, Tavin began carefully tasting the unfamiliar specimens pulled from the mountain soil. One tiny peppercorn berry nearly burned a hole straight through his tongue with its blistering heat. He recalled passing similar shrubs a dozen times, always ignoring them since they offered 0 tactical edge against monsters. Biting into the second specimen, a simple glutamate herb, shifted his entire perspective. The tiny leaf exploded on his palate with a deep, rich, and mouth-watering savory profile. Unearthing a natural seasoning to mask bland trail rations felt like a massive victory, even if the plant itself proved frustratingly scarce. Packing up his botanical haul, Tavin headed back to the fireside to meet up with Kale and Dax. Having crunched the numbers, Kale was now completely sold on their lucrative new partnership. Shaking on it, they officially cemented the contract binding Ashvane as the exclusive sword arms for all of Tavin's future runs. This arrangement worked perfectly for everyone. Tavin secured reliable protection, while young adventurers locked in steady pay, freeing them from the struggle of low-paying odd jobs. Back at the campsite, the 2 young women of the party, Ren, the quiet healer, and Nessa, the energetic mage, had cooked a hot meal. Nessa proudly displayed the 9 herbs she had gathered, considering it a massive haul. To her utter shock, Tavin unzipped his bag to reveal over 100 pristine herbs. The young gatherer explained how his verdant eye let him spot and harvest plants at incredible speeds. Impressed by his unique abilities, the group settled around the fire to share their food. The soup tasted incredible. Nessa revealed her secret, using red-hot herbs for seasoning. A realization struck Tavin. Those supposedly useless spicy plants held immense value for cooking. This sudden discovery deepened his appreciation for his gift, revealing its hidden potential for growth, combat, and everyday survival. Staring into the flames, their lighthearted chatter turned serious. The herb gatherer shared his past, recounting his 5 miserable years trapped in a dead-end job at the Healers Guild. Despite his rare gift, Harkenvel had treated him like dirt and fired him just for lacking combat skills, prompting Dax to stand up and apologize. Guilt gnawed at the laid-back adventurer, confessing he had only invited the boy for his rare skill, which felt exactly like the exploitation the boy had just escaped at the guild. Tavin waved off the apology, admitting he felt glad someone finally found him useful. Embracing his unique talent as his greatest weapon, he vowed to use it to forge his own strength. Ashvane ended the night in high spirits, bonding into a true, unified team. Nessa chimed in, crossing her arms in annoyance over being left out of the loop. Kale and Dax quickly explained their new, exclusive contract to protect the Gatherer on all future expeditions. The young mage beamed with excitement, especially after hearing the horrific details of his guild mistreatment. Boiling with protective rage, Kale and Nessa immediately plotted how to ambush and beat up Hark and Vel. Panic flashed across Tavin's face as he stepped in to stop them, insisting his firing was a blessing that brought them together. As the campfire died down, the young gatherer stepped away to boil a batch of glutamate herb he had scavenged. Nessa trailed right behind him, poking fun at his stiff, formal way of talking. Rubbing the back of his neck, he admitted he simply wanted to sound polite. The energetic mage waved away his manners, insisting they were friends now and should drop the formalities. Following an awkward attempt at casual slang, Tavin relaxed and handed over the fresh herbal stock. Rich flavor exploded on her tongue, proving vastly superior to the raw plant. Thoroughly impressed, she volunteered herself and Ren to help him identify culinary plants moving forward. The next morning, a mouth-watering aroma roused the entire camp from their sleep. Nessa and Ren had poured his herbal stock into a soup, transforming it into a high-end culinary masterpiece. Kale and Dax scraped their bowls clean, while Nessa whispered that these specific herbs would fetch a small fortune. A fresh burst of motivation gripped the young gatherer. On his second day scaling Mount Colvin, he hunted specifically for spices. His verdant eye locked onto peppercorns, ginger, and cumin, ignoring their harsh, bitter taste when eaten raw. Returning to camp, Ren and Nessa inspected his haul, confirming every single stalk is a premium spice. The quiet healer broke down the market rates, noting that raw peppercorns alone fetched a silver coin apiece. Shock widened Tavin's eyes as he realized his profits would utterly dwarf his initial calculations. Following a hearty dinner, he drifted to sleep feeling victorious, though his peace shattered shortly after. Deep into the night, a sudden, icy chill ran down his spine. The surrounding forest fell dead silent. A split second later, a soul-shaking roar tore through the quiet air. Recognizing the howl of a massive wolf, the boy shoved his rising panic aside. Staying remarkably calm, he sprang from his bedroll and quickly alerted Dax inside the tent. Although the seasoned fighters had not yet sensed the danger, Tavin knew exactly what stalked them in the dark. Snatching up his gear and a handful of magical grass for a distraction, he dashed over to the girls' tent. Ignoring the awkwardness of barging into their sleeping quarters, he knew a single wasted second meant death. A lethal threat was closing in, and Ashvane needed to prepare for an immediate fight. Ren stirred calmly, but Nessa shot up in a pure panic the moment she saw a boy in their tent. Clamping a hand over her mouth, he hissed a warning about the approaching monster, demanding they move fast. Hearing his frantic explanation, the girls threw on their armor while Tavin scrambled outside to join Kale and Dax. The two experienced adventurers already stood on high alert. Kale gripped his drawn sword, and Dax dripped with cold sweat, sensing multiple creatures signaling each other in the dark. A wave of pure terror slammed into Tavin. The suffocating darkness instantly dragged him back to the day his previous party abandoned him to die. His knees buckled as he gasped for air, completely paralyzed by the violent flashback. Spotting his panic, Kale and Dax gripped his shoulders, swearing on their lives they would never abandon him. Desperate to snap out of the memory, the gatherer bit his tongue, using the sharp metallic taste of blood to focus. Moving as one, the united party launched into a frantic retreat down the slopes of Mount Colvin. The crushing pressure of the hunt weighed on them. Nessa kept stumbling over unseen roots, and the boys gasped for breath as the unseen monsters rapidly closed the distance. Noticing the group's morale crumbling, Ren spoke up with surprising authority. Reminding everyone her magic could handle whatever crossed their path, she urged them to hold steady. That quiet confidence caught on, and they safely reached the base of the mountain, masking their scent with burning magical grass to throw the pack off their trail. Catching their breath in temporary safety, the adventurers discussed their next move. Most of their gear lay scattered behind them during the frantic escape, but Dax and Kale cared only about Tavin's survival, completely shrugging off the failed mission. That realization struck the young gatherer deeply. Unlike his last escort, this party valued his life. Their brief moment of relief shattered seconds later. A furious roar shook the trees as a lone, scarred wolf stalked out of the shadows. Bypassing the seasoned fighters, its glowing eyes locked directly onto Tavin. Nessa immediately recognized the monster was hunting for revenge after the packmate they had slain earlier. Staring down that raw, burning hatred, the boy steeled his nerves. He refused to die on this mountain. Combat erupted the moment Kale and Nessa charged the beast. Working in tandem, they launched a flurry of heavy slashes and crippling low strikes. But the wolf moved with blinding speed, weaving through their assault and nearly tearing into Nessa on the counter. A desperate, well-timed spell blasted the creature backward, saving the mage at the last possible second. Shrugging off Dax's slowing magic, the predator ignored the coordinated attacks and kept its deadly gaze pinned on the herb gatherer. Stepping into the fray, Tavin sparked a bundle of foul-smelling mystical grass, hoping the noxious smoke would disorient their enemy. The wolf lunged. Tavin whipped a vial of poison at its snout, but the monster anticipated the throw and dodged midair. Stumbling backward, the boy froze in pure terror as snapping jaws clamped down mere inches from his face. A heartbeat away from certain death, Ren drove a condensed orb of magic straight into the creature's open maw, blasting it away. Yet, even with a shattered jaw and blood blinding its eyes, the beast refused to fall. It dragged its broken body across the dirt toward Tavin, fueled entirely by murderous spite. Kale closed the distance in a flash, burying his blade deep into the monster's chest. Ignoring the fatal wound completely, the wolf clawed its way closer to its target. A crushing combined strike from Nessa and Dax finally slammed the beast spinning into the hard earth. Kale ended the struggle with a clean thrust through its heart. Heavy silence settled over the clearing as Tavin sat trembling in the dirt. That predator hadn't viewed him as prey, but as a sworn enemy. Kneeling beside the shaken boy, Ren gently healed his minor scrapes. She fiercely blamed herself for letting their client face danger, though Tavin knew better. Without him acting as bait, and without the party fighting like a seamless unit, that encounter would have been their last. Staring at the scattered remains of their gear, the young gatherer realized he had finally found adventurers he could trust with his life. Catching their breath, Tavin and the members of Ashvane gathered around the slain monster. They survived without casualties, though a heavy knot of guilt twisted in Tavin's gut over the close call. Stepping in, Ren and the rest of the party immediately shut down his apologies. They loudly reminded him that walking away from a C-rank monster without a single major injury was a massive victory. Wasting no time, the crew opted to harvest the valuable wolf carcass right on the trail. Nessa, the energetic mage, enthusiastically explained that while the beast lacked size, its razor-sharp claws, fangs, and pristine fur would fetch a high price in the city. Meanwhile, Kale, the dependable swordsman of Ashvane, shouldered the heavy butchering work, leaving Ren to tend to Dax. The laid-back fighter lay exhausted in the grass, completely drained from pushing his limits during that final strike. Pitching in with the skinning, Tavin noted the monster looked far less terrifying now that its jaws weren't snapping at his throat. Mid-sentence, he caught himself slipping right back into stiff, formal speech from pure nervous habit. Nessa immediately teased him for sounding so stuffy, demanding he drop the act and talk to them like genuine friends. Later that day, standing securely within the bustling streets of Veskir, the weary group prepared to part ways. Since the gathering trip ended prematurely, Tavin insisted the party keep the bulk of the monster parts, pocketing only a single fang and claw. That sharp fang would make a perfect new harvesting knife. Before splitting up, they promised to work together again. Impressed by their flawless teamwork and character, Tavin fully intended to hire Ashvane exclusively for all future mountain runs. Locking the door to his room at the rundown inn, Tavin eagerly pulled out his newly discovered prize, the glutamate herb. Activating his verdant eye, he studied the plant's structure and realized synthesizing more of it would be a breeze. Eager to test its potential, he prepared the leaves 3 different ways: simmering them whole, dicing them into a broth, and drying them into a fine powder. The resulting taste was phenomenal, bursting with a rich, savory depth that felt like striking culinary gold. Unfortunately, using that rich flavor to mask the vile, gag-inducing bitterness of his ironroot medicine ended in complete disaster. The resulting brew tasted so foul, it left him clutching his stomach for an hour, cementing the facts that nothing could hide Ironroot's awful kick. Early the next morning, Tavin marched straight to the Adventurers Guild to wrap up his mission paperwork. The guild chief, a booming but well-meaning bald man, was already waiting for him. Feeling awful about the repeated disasters on Colvin, the official had already dispatched an elite A-rank squad to recover Tavin's abandoned bag. Sliding a heavy pouch across the desk, the chief insisted on paying a hefty compensation fee of 5 solid gold coins. Tavin quickly tried to decline the money, praising Ashvane's flawless protection, but the stubborn man refused to take no for an answer. Giving in, the young gatherer requested that the guild officially reward Ashvane with a promotion and increased pay for their incredible effort. Business concluded, Tavin finally asked the question burning in his mind. Why had Mount Colvin turned into such a death trap? The chief sighed heavily, explaining that the delicate ecosystem on the peaks had completely collapsed. Someone had recently slaughtered the alpha of the local anchor bears, plunging the entire region into territorial chaos. Without a boss to keep them in check, the angry wolf packs now ran wild, claiming new territory. A sudden realization hit Tavin. The giant bear his previous party had killed and eaten was likely that boss, meaning he bore indirect responsibility for the current chaos. Despite the danger, the guild chief permitted him to visit the mountain, provided he exercised extreme caution from now on. Tavin had met with the chief to check the status of the forest. The balance of power had shifted. The local bears were losing ground to the wolves, sparking the recent attacks. The chief advised waiting a few weeks for things to settle before returning to Mount Colvin for herbs. With a decent stock of supplies on hand, the boy chose to remain in the city and focus on training. The guild moved surprisingly fast, having already retrieved his lost bag from the forest. A high-ranking adventuring party called Sunspire had secured the retrieval. That detail felt awkward, considering his mentor Brenna shared a rough history with Sunspire, but he remained grateful to have his gear. Back at his inn, the young gatherer sorted through his haul. Between the failed quest's compensation and the value of his newly foraged herbs and spices, he stared down a profit of nearly 10 gold coins. This marked a massive victory, and he planned to split the extra cash with Nessa and Ren, the adventurers who had shielded him from the wolves. Later that day, Tavin visited Amberleaf to offload his best herbs. Malin Thorne, the old elf who owned the shop, offered him a warm welcome. She revealed that his previous batch of rare herbs had already sold out, providing a deep wave of relief, since Tavin feared his stock was too expensive for her to move. Mid-conversation, he noticed her walking cane and offered to carry her supplies, assuming she nursed a bad leg. To his surprise, the elf slammed the cane down, exposing a hidden sword meant for self-defense. Malin was perfectly healthy, wielding the cane merely as a clever way to stay armed. Waiting for his appraisal, Tavin spotted a top-grade magic potion bearing a 9 gold price tag. That steep cost put it well out of his budget. But it sparked an idea. Would drinking a brewed magic potion expand his total mana faster than chewing on raw magic grass? To test this theory, he purchased 3 low-grade magic potions for over a gold coin. Even at double the standard market rate, he fully trusted Malin's exceptional quality. The gatherer then asked if she knew a method to mask the bitter taste of medicinal plants. Lacking a perfect solution, the elf suggested that strong spices might overpower the foul flavor. She also noted that brewing bitter herbs directly into potions remained the most effective method. With a sharp grin, she offered to take Tavin on as her potion-making apprentice. Temptation tugged at him, given his love for Amberleaf, but he politely declined for now. He explained his primary dream: to travel the world alongside Brenna. However, he promised to return and learn her craft once that grand journey concluded. As Tavin turned to leave for his next meeting, Malin stopped him at the door. The old elf mentioned a recent visit she had made to the Healers Guild. She had gone to the exact place Tavin was fired from to drop off some supplies. There she overheard juicy gossip about a major scandal involving Harkin Vel, the chief who ruined Tavin's job. He had recently been dragged to the royal capital to answer for a massive failure. Malin, always armed with the latest city gossip, eagerly filled the boy in on the absolute chaos engulfing the Healers Guild. It turned out Guild Chief Harkin Vel had made a catastrophic error. Harkin attempted to sell a new, high-powered potion to the royals, but completely failed to extract the poison from the cheap, low-quality herbs he used in the brew. When royal messengers arrived to conduct a surprise inspection, the concoction failed miserably, inflicting severe side effects on the testers. Now Harkin faced imminent arrest, and his guild teetered on the brink of closure. A massive wave of relief washed over Tavin. Had he not been fired a month prior, Harkin definitely would have pinned the entire disaster on him. Stepping out of Amberleaf, Tavin marched toward the Bee House Inn to meet Nessa and Ren. Upon arriving, the sight of the girls completely out of their standard adventuring gear caught him off guard. Nessa rocked a stylish sleeveless top and shorts, while Ren looked like a princess in a flowing white dress. Seeing his friends dressed up made Tavin painfully aware of his own wardrobe, considering he was still wearing his dirt-stained work clothes. The trio headed out to visit a shop owned by a trader named Orden. Ordan stood tall, a shady-looking trader sporting a black hat and an eye patch, but the man knew his business. When Tavin laid out the spices he had gathered, pepper, ginger, cumin, and laurel leaves. Orden nodded in sheer impressed approval, offering 5 full gold coins for the batch. Shock rooted Tavin to the floor. He hated the taste of those plants. Yet, they fetched a higher price than most medicinal herbs. Before leaving, Tavin asked the trader about a mysterious dish rumored to mask the foul taste of medicinal weeds. Ren shyly guessed he meant curry, which Orden quickly confirmed, offering to teach the boy the recipe. Together, they gathered the extra ingredients required: red-hot herb, turmeric, and coriander. Orden led them into his kitchen, a surprisingly spotless space compared to the chaos of his shopfront. When the trader rolled up his sleeves, pale scars crisscrossed his arms, hinting at a violent past. Fixing them with a severe glare, Orden commenced the lesson, guiding the group through cooking the spicy meal. Ren fried the vegetables and spices until they darkened to a rich brown, before Orden mixed the ingredients into a smooth paste that filled the room with a mouth-watering aroma. Water was stirred in, and after a brief simmer, the dish was ready. Orden called the meal curry, serving it alongside fresh bread, and the first bite completely stunned Tavin. The heat made the boy sweat. Yet the flavor proved so intense, he scraped his plate clean in seconds. This intense curry was the perfect disguise for the bitter iron root he needed to swallow for his strength training. Once the meal ended, Tavin showed Orden a stalk of glutamate herb. The one-eyed trader had never encountered the plant, though its potential to enhance flavor caught his interest. He offered 5 silver coins per stalk, an enormous sum. Conjuring these specific plants every single day would solve all the boy's financial problems. That afternoon alone, his sales brought in more than 7 gold coins. Before parting ways, Ren and Nessa promised to cook their own versions of the spicy stew, and Tavin agreed to hire Ashvane for his next expedition before heading back to the inn to work. Boiling his own batch of curry, he stirred in a dose of powdered iron root. A wave of relief washed over him when the heavy spices completely smothered the bitter taste. Tavin could finally stomach his strength-boosting medicine without gagging. Moving on, he uncorked the magic potions purchased from Amberleaf. Unlike the foul sludge he remembered from childhood, this liquid tasted sweet and refreshing. Draining 3 bottles back-to-back, he tested his reserves by conjuring fresh foliage. The experiment proved his maximum magic capacity had expanded by 3 entire points. Buying brews cost far more than chewing raw magical grass, but it saved him the stomach cramps. During sword practice the following morning, his swings felt noticeably faster and heavier. Carrying 40 gold coins from his recent sales left him feeling wealthy and driven. His new objective was clear: sink all this extra coin into potions and push his magic reserves to their absolute limit. After offloading a low-grade harvest at the Adventurers Guild, Tavin planned to strike a major deal with Malin Thorn to refine his raw materials. Flush with spare coin, Tavin could finally direct all his focus toward his personal growth. Approaching Amberleaf felt a little awkward, given his dramatic exit the previous afternoon. Stepping inside, he spotted Malin Thorn, the old elf who owned the shop, working the counter herself for a change. Tavin praised her brews, specifically complimenting the surprisingly pleasant flavor. Malin explained her secret brewing formula, which yielded a better taste and higher potency than standard mixtures. Recognizing him as a reliable supplier of premium herbs, the elf offered a special rate, agreeing to brew his raw magical grass into potions for a mere silver coin per bottle. She warned that the quality of the raw grass dictated the strength of the final potion, and that standard grass alone would never produce top-tier elixirs. Amidst their negotiation, Tavin spotted a radiant premium potion sitting on the top shelf. Malin noted that the highest grade concoctions required a rare ingredient known as dusk bloom herb, which only sprouted inside dangerous dungeons packed with magic and monsters. Tavin had never heard of a dungeon, but he knew he had a long road ahead before braving environments that hostile. Dropping 30 gold coins on assorted brews, Tavin rushed back to his room to begin the experiment. The rest of the day vanished into downing bottles to permanently stretch his internal magic reserves. Tracking the results revealed that the lowest grade potions offered the best return on investment, even if they lacked the smooth flavor of the premium stock. Days of relentless drinking and training bumped his magic capacity from 17 to a solid 79, paving the way for the real test. It was time to see if Verdeni could finally conjure Ironroot. Producing the muscle-strengthening plant was the very goal he had chased for the past month. Lying on his back, Tavin channeled all his energy into his open palm and felt a staggering amount of power rip its way out of his core. Violent tremors shook his hand until the intense drain abruptly vanished. Opening his eyes, he stared at a freshly sprouted Ironroot resting in his palm. Success washed over him, marking a massive milestone in his training. and a sudden wave of emotion hit him as he remembered getting fired from the Healers Guild. Suppressing the sentiment, he forced himself to focus, knowing one single plant was barely a beginning. He had a promise to keep to Brenna, and a mountain of training left to conquer. Testing his remaining reserves, Tavan calculated exactly how much energy the conjuration had consumed, pushing his limits to the edge. Conjuring the high-level ironwood proved to be a massive drain, costing exactly 75 units of magic power. That steep cost limited him to producing one per day, so he planned to synthesize a single root, dry it, and consume it the following afternoon mixed into a spicy curry. Hoping to somehow offset the expensive cost of the spices, he planned to cover the cost by selling glutamate herbs, predicting they would bring in a steady income. Determined to catch up to Brenna, Tavan packed his schedule. After 3 hours of sword practice the next morning, the boy headed into town to finish his errands. His first stop was Anvil Rest, the local blacksmith. He brought an angry wolf fang he found in the woods, hoping to forge it into a custom knife. Boric, the loud and energetic blacksmith, agreed to take the job, pointing out that providing the materials would save Tavan some serious coin. Next, the young gatherer visited Amberleaf to collect potions from Malin. She had brewed several grades of magic potions using the herbs he provided. Tavan realized his verdant eye ability made him perfectly suited for potion crafting, and although tempted to study the craft further, he knew getting stronger had to come first. Malin proved surprisingly kind, even agreeing to save low-quality plants for him instead of dumping them on the Healers Guild. Clutching his new potions, Tavan saw his magic capacity jump to 87 units. That gave him enough mana to synthesize an iron root and a glutamate herb every single day. His final stop was Orden's spice shop. When Tavan pushed the door open, the shady trader looked like a ghost, exhausted with bloodshot eyes and messy hair. The man hadn't slept for 4 days, obsessed with experimenting on the glutamate herb Tavan gave him. Orden declared the herb an absolute game-changer for the culinary world. He promised to keep buying the supply at a premium of 5 silver coins each, even hinting he might eventually need thousands of the plants. Errands complete, Tavan headed back to his inn room. He had dropped a huge chunk of his savings, 4 gold coins on a bulk supply of curry spices, leaving him with just 6 gold pieces. It was a risky investment, but he knew he could synthesize more glutamate herbs if he needed quick cash. Now, everything was ready. The boy prepped his ingredients for the next day, downed his capacity-boosting potions, and began his nightly routine. Focusing his energy, he felt the familiar drain of magic leaving his body. This marked the official start of a month-long training journey to transform himself from the weakest link into a true warrior. Malin didn't even blink. Harkin's punch flew slow and sloppy, reeking of cheap alcohol. Tilting her head just an inch, she let the fist whistle past her ear before driving her palm hard into his chest. The impact launched Harkin backward. He crashed through a wooden table, landing in a heap of broken splinters and spilled beer as the entire bar went silent. Thugs who had been eyeing Malin suddenly looked away. Realizing they weren't dealing with a helpless old lady, Harkin groaned, struggling to crawl out from the wreckage with his face a mess of tears and snot. The former guild chief looked pathetic, a man who once held absolute power, now shivering on a dirty slum floor. Malin stepped closer and loomed over him, casting her shadow across his trembling body. She told him flat out that his downfall had nothing to do with Tavan or bad luck. He lost everything because he was a small, arrogant man who couldn't handle his own job. If he ever tried to go after Tavan, or even mention the boy's name again, she warned, she wouldn't just push him, she would end him for good. Harkin couldn't even find the courage to talk back. Instead, he curled into a ball, sobbing about his lost noble status. Staring down at him, Malin felt a mix of satisfaction and sheer disgust. Having seen enough, the old elf turned and walked out of the bar, letting the heavy door creak shut behind her. Navigating the dark alleys of the slums, Malin found her steps feeling a bit lighter. She had defended Tavan's honor and watched the man who bullied him lose everything. Still, she knew Harkin would hold a grudge despite his powerlessness. She resolved to keep a close watch and ensure Marta knew the Healers Guild was a sinking ship. The next morning, Malin returned to Amberleaf feeling completely refreshed. She realized that while she enjoyed her quiet life running the shop, protecting the people she cared about gave her a completely different kind of energy. Glancing at the empty chair where Tavan usually sat, a smile touched her lips. She looked forward to the day he returned, ready to tell him the man who made his life miserable was now just a joke in a basement bar. For now, she went back to brewing her potions. Peaceful yet ready for whatever came next. Maylin held her ground as Harkin, ever the cocky bully, swung a massive fist at her head. Even though she could have ended the fight in a single breath, the old elf intentionally took the hit to play the victim. She faked flying backward from the impact, prompting the crowd and even the bar owner to cheer for Harkin. Harkin started gloating, calling her a shitty old hag. Completely unaware Maylin was unharmed and just setting him up. Alibi secured, Maylin rose to her feet, brushed off the dust, and marched straight toward him with a calm smile. Harkin's smirk vanished the second he realized his punch had done absolutely nothing. Before he could blink, Maylin drove her cane hard into his stomach, knocking all the wind out of him. She didn't stop there, systematically dislocating both his shoulders and striking his thighs until his legs gave out. A sharp uppercut to his jaw finished the brutal beatdown, leaving the former guild chief face down in a pool of his own blood. To drive the point home, Maylin splashed a bucket of cold water over the man's face to wake him. Paralyzed by fear and nursing snapped bones, Harkin dragged his battered body backward. The old elf leaned close, whispering a dark promise. If he ever laid a finger on Tavin again, she would end his life. The guild chief nodded frantically, his spirit entirely shattered. Satisfied, Maylin flicked a gold coin to the tavern owner for the mess and walked out. That sheer terror drove Harkin to pack his bags and flee Veskir forever just hours later. Over the past month, Tavin threw himself into an intense daily training regime. Consuming the strength-boosting iron root, the teenager drilled his sword techniques from dawn until dusk. The scrawny herb gatherer packed on dense muscle, finally gaining the raw power to swing a heavy steel blade. Confident in this newfound strength, he paused his solitary drills to organize a proper gathering trip. Meeting up with the Ashvane party, his old friends stared in absolute shock. Nessa gasped at his wider shoulders, while Dax was so incredibly jealous he kept poking Tavin's hardened arms, demanding to know his secret. Brushing off the praise with a laugh, Taven just felt glad to see them again. The group quickly plotted a new expedition for the morning. The dense Vardal forest seemed like a solid choice at first, until Ren chimed in. The party's shy healer warned them about the brutal crags roaming those woods. Those vicious B-rank predators posed a far deadlier threat than the wolf pack they had barely survived. Choosing the safer route, the young adventurers agreed to stick to the familiar slopes of Mount Colvin. At daybreak, Tavin strapped on a fresh iron chestplate, secured his steel sword, and sheathed a custom hunting knife. Regrouping with Ashvane outside the guild hall, the team marched toward the gates. Walking down the dirt road, the friends celebrated their recent promotion to E rank, a milestone that guaranteed heavier coin pouches and a shred of respect. Yet standing at the base of Mount Colvin brought back a chill of unease. Their previous visit had nearly ended in a bloodbath while fleeing a pack of rabid wolves. The shy healer spoke up, steadying their nerves by pointing out how much they had grown since that desperate escape. Squaring their shoulders, the 5 teenagers stepped past the tree line to begin the ascent. Reaching the mountain's midpoint without a single monster sighting, the calm woods prompted them to stick to their usual routine. Nessa and Ren stayed behind to pitch tents and start a fire, while Kale and Dax escorted Tavin into the brush. Trudging through the undergrowth, Kale asked how the gatherer had packed on so much muscle. Tavin described a grueling regimen, tearing his muscles to the absolute limit, slathering on recovery slime to heal overnight, and repeating the torture for 30 days straight. A pang of guilt hit the swordsman, fearing this extreme drive stemmed from their failure to protect him. But the gatherer quickly shot that down, insisting he simply wanted the power to stand on his own 2 feet. Those next 3 days proved massively successful. Tavin harvested a record haul of rare spices and his favorite iron root. Morale soared around the crackling campfire. The meals hit the spot, and it felt like a flawless expedition. Until the final night, when a sudden spike of dread gripped Tavin's chest. A suffocating presence pressed down on the camp. Recognizing the scent of a vicious wolf, he shook his friends awake. This wasn't a blind chase. The glowing eyes in the dark proved the pack had them entirely circled. Guttural howls echoed from 3 separate directions, cutting off the only safe trail back down the slope. With the trap sprung, Kale and Nessa panicked, ready to sprint. Tavin stopped them, arguing that holding a wide clearing beat dying on a narrow path. Tracking their movements, the gatherer realized these beasts were locked directly onto him. He pitched a desperate gamble. He would stand dead center as living bait, while the rest of the party scrambled into the shadows. Grabbing bundles of magical grass from his pouch, they tossed the stalks straight into the campfire. The burning weeds choked the clearing with an acrid, blinding smoke. stripping the beasts of their keen smell. Standing exposed in the billowing gray haze, Tavin watched a massive, silver-furred wolf step from the tree line. The monster radiated murderous intent, but the newly forged warrior didn't flinch. The instant the beast lunged, Tavin dug his heels in and sprinted toward a boulder hiding his friends. Closing the distance in a blur of gray fur, the monster nearly snapped its jaws shut on his ankles. Knowing he would never reach safety, the boy abandoned the retreat for a split-second counterattack. Digging his boots into the dirt, he pivoted sharply, whipping his heavy steel blade from its sheath. Putting his entire back into the brutal swing, he prayed the desperate strike would just buy him a second. Instead, the razor-sharp steel cleaved straight through the monster's skull, dropping the beast dead in the dirt. Tavin froze in absolute disbelief, his hands completely numb because the blade had sheared through bone without catching. Staring blankly at the crimson steel, the gatherer could barely process the devastating raw power coursing through his veins. Two more wolves stalking from the brush slammed on the brakes, paralyzed by the sight of a human butchering their packmate in a single stroke, leaving Tavin to hold his ground against the remaining predators in total stunned silence. Cold sweat dripped down his face, knowing he could never repeat that flawless swing. But he kept the bloody sword raised and held their gaze. Bursting from their hiding spot, Nessa and Kale stopped in their tracks, utterly floored that their fragile friend had slaughtered a monster of that caliber solo. Sensing the sheer threat of the bloody sword and witnessing that impossible feat of strength, the remaining beasts tucked their tails and vanished back into the black forest. The second the glowing eyes faded, the adrenaline crashed, and Tavin slumped onto the damp grass. Scraping by death for the third time this month, the boy chalked his survival up to nothing but blind luck. Nessa immediately swarmed him, loudly praising that devastating sword strike, before her voice abruptly cracked into tears. Guilt racked the young mage, fully aware their reckless decoy gamble had nearly gotten him ripped to shreds. Waving off the tears, Tavin offered his own apology, admitting he never should have pitched such a suicidal strategy. Once Rin and Dax finally scrambled out of the brush, the reunited party packed up camp and marched back to Veskir. Back in town, the group discussed their own weakness. Despite holding E-rank status, these young adventurers realized their supposed escort target had shielded them instead. Rin and her teammates vowed to push their limits, hoping to fight alongside Tavin as true equals. Returning to his inn, Tavin collapsed into bed to sleep off the exhaustion, yet his mind kept replaying that one flawless strike. For an entire week, he tried to recreate the swing, failing every time. Only the crushing pressure of a life-or-death struggle had forced that technique out of him. During this time, a mysterious woman kept observing him on her morning jogs. A seasoned warrior, she had run this quiet route through the city for years. Initially, his presence irritated her, and she dismissed his swordplay as childish flailing. As the weeks bled by, she caught sight of his terrifying growth in speed. Raw talent bled from every swing, yet his utter lack of foundation left his stance littered with fatal openings. Watching such incredible potential go to waste caused her physical pain, sparking a fierce urge to rebuild his fundamentals from the ground up. 3 months slipped by like this. Pushing through grueling daily routines, Tavin joined Ashvane for their monthly gathering quests. No wolves ambushed them this time, though the young gatherer felt certain he could slaughter one if it tried. Driven by his explosive growth, the 4 adventurers threw themselves into brutal training regimens. Tavin still failed to conjure that perfect sword strike on command, yet his baseline strength swelled past lucky beginner status into a genuine threat, drawing attention. Onlookers started recognizing a ceiling far above any ordinary adventurer, though Tavin himself felt stranded. Over these past months, his friends in Ashvane had bled through relentless drills under an elite mentor named Garrick. Each reunion revealed sharper reflexes and deadlier teamwork, culminating in a recent C-rank kill. Tavin matched their effort, but even chewing raw iron root to force his physical limits couldn't bridge the widening gap in their progress. A proper master, he concluded, made all the difference in the world. Mid-swing in the courtyard one morning, a familiar face caught his eye. That female royal knight had lingered lately, upgrading from passing jogs to crouching behind a nearby building, peering at him with a cold, dignified glare. That piercing stare unnerved him enough to ruin his rhythm entirely. Seeking counsel, he marched straight to Amberleaf to consult the old elven shopkeeper. Malin Thorne brewed masterwork potions and kept her ear to the ground for city rumors. Securing a batch of potent elixirs, Tavin asked if she knew anyone who could hammer real swordplay into him. The old elf warned him away from unreliable mercenaries, suggesting he approach the regular kingdom garrison or even the royal knights. For enough coin, those veterans occasionally took on civilian students. A sudden thought struck him. Perhaps his daily morning spectator wasn't just creeping on him. Sensing an opportunity, Tavan caught her peering around the corner again at dawn. He marched right up to her hiding spot, throwing the seasoned warrior into utter panic. This normally icy night captain, Verena Cold, stumbled over obvious lies about enjoying the scenery, flashing her official kingdom credentials in a flustered blur. Hoping to diffuse the awkwardness, Tavan invited her inside the inn for tea. Steaming cups restored her dignified aura, though a faint flush clung to her cheeks. Pouring his own cup, he asked why she spent every morning stalking a teenage gatherer. Verena confessed to analyzing his blade work, immediately following it up with a brutal critique. Declaring his swings childish nonsense, she tore into his wasted stamina and terrible footing. Despite the insults, she acknowledged a frightening natural instinct hidden beneath the mess. Watching a raw genius stagnate in the mud without a mentor grated on her professional pride. A strict master, she promised, would shatter his current limits in weeks. Months of solitary practice proved his self-taught methods were hitting a wall. Having finally confronted the woman who watched his daily routine from the shadows, he pressed his advantage. Sitting across from Verena Cold, the youngest knight captain in royal history, he weighed his options. A living legend to the public, this fierce warrior crumbled into a shy, awkward mess behind closed doors. Her blunt admission that his terrible technique offended her professional pride sealed his decision. Recognizing a master when he saw one, Tavan bluntly asked her to take him on as a student. Verena immediately straightened her posture, feigning a completely booked schedule to look important. The moment he shrugged and threatened to hire someone else, her icy facade shattered into pure panic. Desperate to mold his talent, her attempt at playing hard to get backfired spectacularly. Frantically walking back her refusal, she agreed to teach him the blade on one strict rule. He had to swear absolute secrecy regarding her creepy alleyway observations. Whispers of a knight captain stalking a teenage boy would turn her sterling reputation to ash overnight. Chuckling at her frantic demands, Tavan sealed the deal, assuring her he never considered it stalking to begin with. They properly introduced themselves and struck up a quick friendship. Verena boasted an impressive career at 27, while the teenager explained his life gathering herbs. Setting a plan, they agreed to gather outside his inn for morning training. Landing a high-ranking knight for a first instructor felt incredibly lucky, and the captain was secretly thrilled to finally claim her first apprentice. The following dawn, Tavan rolled out of bed early, grabbed food, and strapped on his armor. Excitement pushed him forward, eager to begin a real lesson. Verena watched from her usual hiding spot before stepping into view to launch their journey. Training carried one strict condition. Her new pupil had to keep her stalking a total secret. Tavan promised to keep his mouth shut, bringing massive wave of relief to the knight captain's reputation. With that awkward air cleared, their hard work began the very next morning. Even arriving early wasn't enough to beat Verena, who stood waiting with genuine excitement. First, she told him to demonstrate his usual sword swings, halting him after only a brief look. His messy form came from blindly mimicking a unique style that completely failed to match his build. Ordering him to abandon everything he knew, she demonstrated a clean overhead slash. That simple motion looked so utterly flawless, it left Tavan speechless. Attempting to copy her movement exposed the painful reality of his own skills. Assuring him practice would close the gap, Verena pushed him relentlessly for the next few hours. Every tiny detail drew her strict correction, from his stiff posture down to his footwork. Finishing the session drains Tavan more than any monster hunt. Yet he felt fantastic knowing he was finally learning proper technique. For 2 solid weeks, they met every dawn, slowly smoothing his awkward swings into a natural rhythm. The young gatherer realized this woman was far more than a quirky stalker. She was an elite warrior passing down invaluable instruction. Once his foundation set properly, Verena transitioned their sessions toward live combat. Practicing swings built good habits, she explained, but real strength only forged through fighting. The knight captain revealed her mastery spanned multiple weapons far beyond the sword. Offering to spar, she promised to hold back her true power. Nerves chewed at Tavan, yet he remained determined to land a single solid strike. The spar began, and Tavan charged in with a heavy overhead slash, which Verena effortlessly deflected. His blade struck dead air, losing all momentum before a gentle shove sent him stumbling backward. Staring across that massive gap in strength left his confidence badly shaken. Verena shouted encouragement to keep trying. Knowing raw power would fail, Tavan scrambled for a plan, and figured using items like his magical grass might force an opening through her flawless guard. Yet he quickly realized a lifetime of brainstorming would never outsmart an elite veteran actively analyzing his every move. Slipping behind her back proved useless against footwork that countered him with barely a shift. She offered blunt advice, His footwork held up fine, but his swings lacked any real driving force. Frustration flared in Tavin as he fought desperately while she stayed relaxed enough to lecture him. Switching tactics, he threw feints, diagonal slashes, and thrusts, but nothing broke her defense. Relying on his one confident strike, he built a trap to deliver it. A fake thrust drew her attention, letting him slip into her blind spot, and finally unleash his heavy downward strike, holding nothing back. The wooden weapons clashed with a sharp crack, but Verena dropped into a low stance to absorb the impact completely. Shock froze Tavin as his practice sword snapped clean in half against her guard. Calling off the spar, Verena explained he needed to learn firsthand that spamming one move fails in combat. The painful lesson sank in, cementing his respect for her brilliant teaching. Mentioning an upcoming 4-day gathering quest brought a sudden change in her demeanor. Verena looked visibly saddened, almost shocked to face nearly a week without seeing him. Guilt washed over Tavin for keeping her in the dark, so he swore to practice his forms on the road. Waking up the next morning meant groaning through a body aching from their intense spar. Slime liquid and recovery potions soothed his battered muscles before he marched to the guild, to rendezvous with Ashvane. The E-rank team he regularly hired for protection consisted of Kale, Dax, Nessa, and Ren. Despite their rising fame for clearing dangerous quests at record speed, the adventurers treated Tavin like family and promised to always take his jobs. Hiking up the trails of Mount Colvin kept the mood light and casual. Nessa poked fun at a promise Tavin supposedly made, leaving him completely baffled by the joke. Ren confirmed she had made a promise, leaving Tavin both puzzled and eager to see what awaited them at camp. Heading toward the gathering site, the young herb gatherer challenged Kale and Dax to a friendly mock battle. Kale jumped at the idea, but Dax hesitated, dreading the sheer embarrassment of losing to the client they were hired to protect. It took some pushing, and Kale declaring Tavin an honorary party member before Dax finally caved. Ashvane reached their base camp and wrapped up a highly profitable gathering run. Tavin harvested heaps of magical grass, alongside 3 rare ironroot weeds. Right as they packed their gear, an unfamiliar plant species caught the gatherer's eye. He scanned the brush, eager to discover what else Colvin Mountain held in store. Digging into the soil, he unearthed a rare curare leaf carrying a potent paralysis effect. The herb offered the perfect ingredient to brew a far deadlier batch of toxic slime. Pleased with the day's haul, he treks back to camp alongside Kale and Dax. Approaching the clearing, a rich, spicy scent drifted through the mountain air. Messa and Ren had spent the afternoon preparing an absolute feast for the party. The mage quickly teased Tavin for completely forgetting their promised curry tasting, but her smug grin faded into a warm smile as she watched him enjoy the meal. Ren served up a light vegetable stew, contrasting perfectly with Nessa's heavy meat dish. Accustomed to bitter medicinal slop, the boy sat stunned by how incredible the real dish tasted. Dinner left everyone in high spirits until Kale abruptly changed the subject. The swordsman proposed a sparring tournament to test the whole group's combat skills. Tavin eagerly accepted, desperate to test the techniques he learned from his secret mentor, the powerful knight captain Verena Cold. Nessa jumped at the challenge, and surprisingly, even Ren, who normally hung back during skirmishes, stepped forward ready to fight. A quick game of rock, paper, scissors settled the tournament brackets. Dax drew Tavin for the opening match, leaving Kale to face off against Ren. Taking his spot across the clearing, Dax looked visibly rattled. The adventurer raised his guard, but his opponent had drilled one specific overhead slash all month. Lunging forward, the young gatherer swung his practice blade with everything he had. The brutal, lightning-fast arc bypassed Dax's hasty defense completely. Wood cracked hard against Dax's skull, dropping him flat on his back in the dirt. Ren rushed in and cast a healing spell immediately, ensuring Dax recovered without injury, though the gatherer's sudden speed left him shaken. Next came Kale versus Ren. Catching Tavin completely off guard, the shy healer proved to be Ashvane's deadliest sword fighter. Steel clashed in a high-level bout as the two traded blinding strikes and ruthless counters. Ren claimed victory with 3 clean hits, leaving the swordsman groaning but deeply impressed. With both Tavin and the healer advancing past the brutal first round, another game of rock, paper, scissors drafted the gatherer to fight Nessa, who promised zero mercy. Taking her position, the mage stood unnervingly still, daring him to strike first. Trusting his training, the boy defaulted to his signature overhead cleave. He closed the distance, eyed his opening, and unleashed the massive swing. Nessa snapped into action, raising her blade to catch the blow. The ferocious impact of wood hitting wood rang across the mountain like shattering iron. Tavin caught her brutal counterattack, but the sheer kinetic force sent him skidding backward. The sudden surge in the gatherer's physical strength left both Nessa and Dax speechless. He desperately tried to maintain focus, but the momentary distraction shattered his rhythm. Resuming the duel, the mage instantly demonstrated why she fought for a living. A dizzying string of feints tied Tavan in knots before her blade cracked against his arm. Pressing her advantage, she refused to give him a single second to recover. Her raw combat experience overwhelmed his defenses, landing 3 rapid strikes in succession. Frustration boiled in his chest. He opened with a flawless strike, yet completely failed to track her blistering pace and veteran footwork. Regardless, his opponent praised the bout and offered to spar on every future gathering quest. He accepted in a heartbeat, recognizing the perfect chance to measure his own growth. The impromptu tournament became a daily ritual for the remainder of their trip. The mage ultimately claimed the Grand Champion title, relying on an unpredictable, purely intuitive fighting style that proved an absolute nightmare to counter. Scraping the bottom of the scoreboard only threw fuel on the fire for Tavan and Dax. The defeat proved he needed far more than a single practiced swing to survive a real fight. Arriving back in Veskir, Tavan crossed paths with Verena Cold, his mentor from the Royal Knights. The Knight Captain waited near his inn, feigning indifference to mask her deep concern for his safety. Wasting no time, they agreed to resume his brutal swordsmanship training at dawn. For the next 3 months, Tavan's life turned into a relentless grind. Dawn and dusk saw Verena pushing him to master swordplay, drilling him on diagonal slashes, thrusts, and uppercuts. Afternoons found him at Amberleaf, studying potion crafting under Malin Thorn, the kind but sharp-tongued elven owner. Malin passed down her secret methods for brewing potions that lacked any bitter aftertaste, and the young gatherer found the quiet process a welcome escape from his brutal combat drills. Verena's dedication remained absolute. The Knight Captain worked her demanding post all day, yet still sacrificed her mornings and nights to train him. Deeply grateful, he vowed to one day grow strong enough to challenge his mentor properly. All that sweat paid off during his next gathering trip, where he finally bested Nessa in a mock duel, proving he was no longer a raw beginner. Come sunrise, Verena arrived for training looking entirely transformed. She had swapped her heavy knight armor for stylish civilian clothes, letting her hair fall loose. Announcing her day off, she dragged the stunned Tavan deep into the Vardal forest, a dangerous zone swarming with tough monsters. Even though the Knight Captain dressed for a casual autumn stroll, she declared it was finally time to test his blade against living beasts. The promised picnic quickly revealed itself as his first true trial in the unforgiving wild. Past battles had pitted him against scattered goblins and wolves in the open, but the Vardal forest was a different beast, choked with thick trunks and terrible visibility that created a perfect ambush spot for lurking monsters. Nerves prickled his skin, but having his mentor there kept him steady. Verena pointed out that since he had nailed the fundamentals of swordsmanship, the boy needed to face real combat, where a single misstep meant death. Tracking beasts through their own territory would forge the combat instincts he lacked. Pushing deeper into the dark, howling woods, the young gatherer kept his sword drawn and his senses sharp. His mentor, meanwhile, strolled through the gloom as casually as if wandering a sunny park. Without warning, she quietly signaled that hostiles were closing in. Silence stretched for a few tense seconds before 4 kobolds, vicious, dog-like monsters, leapt straight from the shadows. Refusing to panic, he shifted smoothly, dropping the first 3 with tight, precise slashes. As the final creature broke and ran, he chased it down, ending it with a single strike. His brutal regimen was finally paying dividends. Skirmishes that once pushed him to the brink now felt almost effortless. Verena offered a nod of approval, but warned their day wasn't over. They soon approached a rocky cave, which she identified as an abandoned dungeon. Active dungeons typically housed a magic core that spawned both beasts and treasure, but even after the core dies and scavengers strip the loot, lingering monsters claim the empty caverns as nests. Ignoring these dens allowed the packs to multiply and eventually spill out onto the local merchant roads. They stepped into the pitch-black cavern. A quick light spell from Verena pushed back the gloom, but she quickly warned him that the glow would draw every hostile eye inside. Almost instantly, the clatter of hundreds of rushing footsteps echoed up from the dark depths. A massive tide of goblins, kobolds, and horned rabbits flooded up the tunnel toward them. Raising the stakes, the Knight Captain stepped back and refused to draw her own blade. She commanded him to hold the line and slaughter the entire horde by himself. Cold dread spiked in his chest, but he steadied his breathing. These feral creatures lacked strategy, relying purely on a blind, frenzied charge. Targeting the swift kobolds first, he carved through their ranks with efficient swings, then pivoted to meet the goblins and leaping rabbits. Every step had to be flawless, as a single missed block meant being swarmed. Combat dragged on for what felt like hours, leaving his muscles screaming and his limbs trembling with fatigue. Right as his stamina bottomed out, a final, desperate pack of monsters rushed his position. Lead weighed down his aching arms. But as he brought his heavy blade down on a kobold, something deep inside him clicked. That familiar, effortless rush of power flooded his veins. The exact same surge he had unlocked during his last desperate struggle. By loosening his stance and erupting with explosive strength right at the point of impact, his blade blurred with devastating force. The remaining beasts fell in mere seconds, their crude defenses shattering instantly against his perfected technique. Standing amid the slaughtered horde, the young swordsman realized he had finally shattered his old limits. With the final goblin dead, he collapsed to the stone floor, utterly spent. Individual weakness didn't matter when the sheer numbers required non-stop, draining violence. His mentor stepped over the corpses, offering a critical eye on his performance. She noted his sloppy footwork as fatigue set in, but praised his breakthrough in finally finding a true rhythm with the blade. When it was time to hike back to Vesker, his trembling legs simply refused to support him. Verena offered to carry him on her back. Burning with embarrassment, but unable to walk, he awkwardly accepted. Bouncing along the forest path, he found himself far too flustered by her scent and warmth to hold a decent conversation. He did, however, get a front-row seat to her master-level swordplay as she casually slaughtered roaming beasts without ever dropping him. Near the forest edge, Verena finally set him down, determined to keep her own knights from spotting them together. She threw a teasing jab about him enjoying the ride, prompting him to stammer out a defense about merely studying her combat forms. Dragging himself home, he tended to his bruised muscles and immediately passed out. 6 grueling months evaporated. Tempered in the fires of Verena's daily drills, Tavin transformed, leaving the frail gatherer far behind. While gathering plants with his friends in the Ashvane party, they decided to host a mock tournament. His friends Nessa, Kale, and Ren had recently reached C rank, but they all freely admitted Tavin's growth was even more impressive. The opening match pitted him against Nessa. The mage fought with a wild, unpredictable rhythm, yet Tavin kept his cool. She charged in for a surprise strike, only to meet a heavy overhead blow that shattered her stance. Ignoring her feints, he maintained an ironclad defense and forced her to burn through her stamina. Pushed into desperation, she rushed her footwork and left a glaring opening. A sharp thrust and a quick follow-up slash won him the round without a scratch. Over in the other bracket, a massive upset unfolded. Dax, typically the weakest of the four, defeated Kale by playing a remarkably clever defensive game. Kale stood there stunned, while Tavin beamed with pride at Dax's hard-earned progress. The two boys bumped fists, promising to face each other in the grand finale. Before reaching that final showdown, Tavin still had to get past Ren. The shy healer specialized in counterattacks, making her incredibly difficult to hit. When the round began, both fighters froze in place, waiting for someone to flinch. Seeing that Ren absolutely refused to budge, Tavin finally took the first step. He closed the distance until their wooden blades crossed, bracing himself for a grueling exchange. The pair locked into a tense stalemate. Their swords ground together while Nessa yelled at them to actually fight. Ren built her entire style around baiting strikes, making any offensive move against her deeply dangerous. Trying to ruin her rhythm, Tavin mixed sluggish blows with sudden, rapid swings. But Ren was too sharp, faking a clumsy stumble to lure him into a devastating counterattack. He barely blocked the blow, realizing this match required reading her mind rather than just swinging a weapon. Following a nerve-wracking flurry of exchanges, he finally spotted a genuine opening. Shoving aside the fear of walking into another trap, he lunged in and cracked his blade against her arm. That single strike sealed the win. Exhausted and nursing a headache from the mental strain, he sat down next to Ren, who admitted she felt completely crushed, unable to land a single finishing blow despite emptying her bag of tricks. The two shook hands, thrilled by the high-stakes duel. But the tournament wasn't over yet. With the sun dipping below the trees, Tavin stepped up to face Dax in the finals. Dax rarely stood out in a brawl, but today he brought a unique advantage. He wielded a secret magic buff called Auto Bravery, flooding his body with explosive speed and raw power. The second the match began, Dax blurred across the grassy field. Fortunately, sparring with Ren had sharpened Tavin's reflexes to a razor edge. He instantly raised his guard, deflecting a wild swing that would have ended the bout on the spot. Grinning, Dax suggested they drop the tactical play and just trade blows head-on. Tavin gladly agreed, kicking off a brutal clash where fancy footwork no longer mattered. Wood hammered against wood as both boys pushed their physical limits to the absolute brink. Both grinned through the stinging pain, riding the pure adrenaline high of the slugfest. Right in the middle of a heavy exchange, Dax's weapon ripped out of his grip and spun away. He scrambled to retrieve it, only to collapse in the dirt. His body had hit its limit, and his magical buff had completely run dry. Nessa immediately declared Tavin the champion. For the next 3 days of their mountain expedition, Tavin kept his winning streak rolling. He ultimately claimed the title of undisputed mock battle champion for the first time all year. Once the party wrapped up their gathering work, they started the trek back to Veskir. Tavin could hardly wait to tell his mentor, Verena, all about his combat progress. Yet the moment they reached the city gates, a heavy, suffocating tension filled the air. A massive column of armored royal knights thundered out of the main gates on horseback. Leading the charge was a fierce woman in shining plate armor, Verena herself. The knight captain locked eyes with him for a fraction of a second before galloping past. Sensing that something massive and incredibly dangerous had just gone down, Tavin trailed his friends into the Adventurers Guild to learn why the elites were marching. The purple-skinned troll standing in the center of the square was on an entirely different level. Unlike the mindless green variants they fought on the road, this monster looked calculating and composed. Rather than blindly rushing, it simply watched the party, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "Stay sharp," Kale whispered, his knuckles turning white on his hilt. "This isn't a normal troll. It's probably a pack leader." Ren immediately fired a spell to block the creature's regeneration, but the giant purple troll casually batted the magic away like a pesky fly. It unleashed a window-rattling growl and charged with terrifying, unnatural speed. Tavin didn't hesitate. Channeling the explosive dash used against the ogres, he dove beneath the swinging club. But this monster actually reacted. Shifting its massive weight, the beast launched a vicious kick, forcing the boy to roll frantically just to survive. "Nessa on the left, Kale take the right!" Tavin barked, instantly finding his battlefield rhythm. The three fighters unleashed a high-speed blur of blades around the monster. Nessa and Kale harassed its legs with quick slashes, giving Tavin a chance to hunt for an opening. Even with Dax's strength buff, the troll proved incredibly tough, their swords barely scratching its thick purple hide. Every fresh cut immediately tried to knit itself shut, fighting hard against Ren's lingering magic. Swinging its club in a massive sweeping arc, the beast forced the entire group to scramble backward. Spotting a fleeting gap, Tavin vaulted off a nearby stone fountain, spinning to build mid-air momentum. Throwing his entire weight into the strike, he aimed straight for the back of the beast's neck as it tried to turn. Nessa and Kale lunged forward in unison, driving their blades into its knees to pin the monster in place. That single second was all the opening required. The descending blades sank deep into the troll's neck, cleaving tough muscle and bone. Hitting the ground with a heavy thud, the massive purple brute finally collapsed. Its lifeless body settled into a ruined heap across the blood-stained cobblestones. Silence swept over the square for a brief moment, as the exhausted group gasped for air. Wiping sweat from his brow, Kale offered a quick word of praise for the fatal strike. Without that aerial maneuver, they would have spent an hour grinding the beast down. Yet there was no time to celebrate. Fresh growls echoed down from the rooftops and narrow alleys, proving the Demon King's forces were far from finished. Thick plumes of smoke rose from the deeper parts of the city, right where the main civilian shelters sat. Pointing toward the inner district, Ren urged everyone to keep moving. She guessed the royal knights had already been pushed all the way back to the palace gates. Delaying any further meant there would be no city left to save, prompting a firm nod from the rest of the team. Exhaustion weighed them down, and the air choked them with ash and monster blood. But they refused to quit. Pushing through the fatigue, Tavin led the 4 Ashvane members into a dead sprint deeper into the burning ruins of Veskir. Every single one of them readied their weapons to face whatever horrors the Demon King had waiting. Standing out from the mindless horde, the purple troll carried the menacing presence of a high-ranking officer. Unlike the lesser beasts, this creature possessed speech, flashing a vulgar smile as it taunted its prey. Tavin, Kale, and Nessa froze in pure shock, instantly realizing this threat eclipsed anything they had faced before. Retreat seemed like the only option, until a lost little girl stumbled directly into the middle of the deadly standoff. Hoisting its massive greatsword to crush the child, the troll swung. But Tavin's body launched forward on pure instinct, closing the distance in a blur. The young gatherer intercepted the crushing blow a fraction of a second before impact. The violent impact shattered the stone beneath his boots, yet he held his ground, scooped up the terrified child, and fell back. Catching the girl, Dax and Ren pulled her to safety, signaling the true start of this desperate battle. A pair of ogres rushed in to flank them, only for Tavin to sever their heads with 2 flawless strikes. Despite relentless pressure from Kale and Nessa, the purple giant merely toyed with the young adventurers, boasting lethal speed and crushing strength. The monster deflected every desperate attack with a booming laugh. The beasts savored the bloodshed, while the teenagers burned through their remaining stamina. Dragging on for agonizing minutes, the fight pushed them to the brink, relying entirely on Ren's desperate healing spells. Even worse, her suppression magic completely failed to slow down the troll's monstrous recovery rate. Fresh flesh closed over deep gashes almost instantly, erasing every hard-earned wound. Realizing a fair fight meant certain death, Tavin reached into his pouches to deploy his alchemical arsenal. Hurling a volatile poison flask, he immediately followed it up with a concentrated paralysis brew. Dripping with arrogance, the brute swatted the glass from the air, allowing the corrosive liquids to wash directly over its skin. Shrugging off the splash at first, the monster soon faltered as its flesh bubbled and its massive limbs locked up. Pressing his newfound advantage, the young hero downed a high-grade strength concoction. The vile liquid burned his throat, immediately flooding his veins with an explosive surge of raw physical power. Finally matching the monster's terrifying output, Tavin launched into a furious counteroffensive. A thunderous two-handed strike hammered into the beast's guard, forcing the massive creature to stagger backward. Capitalizing on the stun, Nessa and Kale carved deep into its stomach, though the corrupted flesh still stitched itself shut. Roaring in frustration, the beast ignored Tavin's blade and smashed a brutal backhand directly into Kale. The young swordsman hit the dirt coughing blood, screaming for his team to press the attack. Watching his friend fall ignited a new fire in Tavin, driving him to trade heavy, punishing blows with the giant. Fueled by the alchemical fire in his blood, the young gatherer struck faster and harder with every passing second. Reveling in the unbridled violence, the demon spawn matched his fury, turning the chaotic skirmish into a blinding blur of steel. Pushed to its absolute limit, the beast's regeneration faltered as the stacked poison and paralysis ripped through its nervous system. Finding gaps in the creature's slowing defenses, the glowing blade carved jagged ravines into thick muscle, signaling the final clash. Honed by pure survival instinct, the boy's swordsmanship grew sharper with every deafening parry against the brute. A critical stutter in the monster's footwork exposed its shoulder, allowing a flawless sweep to sever its arm and send the greatsword spinning away. Seizing the ultimate opening, a final, ruthless thrust ended the creature's reign of terror once and for all. Spitting blood with its final breath, the towering beast chuckled at the glorious fight right before the blade severed its spine. Panic instantly replaced battle rage as the victorious fighter turned back to check on his fallen friend. Spinning around, he found Kale bleeding heavily on the cobblestones, surrounded by a terrified Ren, Nessa, and Dax. Dropping to her knees, Ren funneled every ounce of healing magic into the young swordsman until Kale finally opened his eyes, battered but stable. Seeing his friend safe at last, the strength potion's adrenaline faded, leaving Tavin to collapse from pure exhaustion. As Ren treated the boy's fatigue, little Elsie bounded over to thank her rescuer with a bright smile. Moments later, Verena, the youngest captain of the Royal Knights, rode into view, alongside Elsie's mother. Once the tearful reunion ended, the knight pulled Tavin aside. That purple troll he had just killed, she warned, was nothing but a disposable foot soldier for the Demon King. Shock rooted Tavin in place. Such a terrifying monster ranked as an absolute nobody to their enemy. A short while later, his team Ashvane crossed paths with a veteran adventurer named Garrick. Finding the young herb gatherer too exhausted to walk, the older man hoisted Tavin onto his back for the journey home. Despite his status as a living legend, Garrick carried himself with quiet humility. Along the road, he explained that the beast was a venom troll, a monstrosity artificially bred in the Demon King's war camps. This meant the enemy could mass-produce these nightmares at will. Reaching his inn room, Tavin crashed into a heavy slumber. A sudden noise shattered his sleep, revealing a shadow standing over his bed. Panic flared before he recognized Verena. The knight had let herself in, worried sick when the boy failed to answer her knock. She shifted on her feet, looking unusually bashful, a stark contrast to her fierce knight captain persona. Extending a hand, she offered him a premium recovery potion as a gift. One sip told Tavin this was no ordinary draft. The rich taste marked it as top-grade stock from Malin's shop. Amberleaf. Astonishment washed over him that she would spend so much coin on his recovery, while Verena looked genuinely impressed that he could identify the vintage purely by taste. Following the brutal clash at Veskir, Tavin roused from sleep to find Verena watching over him. The master swordswoman who secretly mentored him now stood vigil beside his bed. She presented him with a top-tier healing draft, a remarkably rare and costly gesture. Though she assured him the city was reclaimed and the monsters purged, a heavy guilt weighed on the boy's chest. Witnessing such widespread ruin proved he lacked the strength to protect those who needed it most. A new resolution hardened in his mind. Merely keeping pace with his fierce friend Brenna was no longer enough. He craved the raw power to shield others. Over the next 3 days of bed rest, Tavin evaluated his life in Veskir. A full year had passed since he began sparring with Verena and brewing with Maylin at Amberleaf. Despite his massive growth, he felt himself crashing into a solid wall. His progress crawled to a halt, and that savage clash with the Venom Troll proved he survived only through Ashvane's support and his verdant eye, rather than true combat prowess. Sticking to this comfortable routine meant it would take a solid decade to reach the heights he envisioned. True mastery, Tavin decided, required leaving the city walls behind to wander the wider world. He aimed to harvest rare plants to push his limits and brave the depths of deadly dungeons. Above all else, he intended to track down Brenna, who had not returned to visit him in an entire year. With his strength fully restored, Tavin stepped out to meet Verena in front of his inn. Following a brief sparring match, he dropped the heavy news. He was leaving Veskir. Verena reeled in shock, urging him to stay and insisting he already wielded incredible strength for his age. At this stage, however, Tavin laid bare the truth. He completely lacked her innate genius for swordsmanship. Stagnation had set in, he pointed out, and on this path, he would never land a winning strike against her. Silence fell over the Knight Captain as the undeniable reality sank in, prompting Tavin to swear he wasn't giving up. Stepping away was the only method to forge a new path to power and eventually eclipse her skill. Recognizing the blazing resolve in his eyes, Verena offered a soft smile and her full blessing. She swore to wait for his return and their inevitable rematch. Gripping her hand, Tavin silently vowed to do absolutely whatever it took to build the strength needed to keep that promise. Veskir spent 3 weeks pulling its own rubble out of the streets, and Tavin worked every one of those days. Rebuilding a city is mostly carrying, and a boy who can name every splinter of wood turns out to be surprisingly useful at it. Ren ran the infirmary tents by the eastern gate, and he brought her whatever the trampled fields still had left in them. Walking again by the second week, Kale did it slowly, with one hand always resting along the wall. The healers had told him his ribs were knitting well, and that he should not lift anything heavier than a cup. Lifting a crate on the 9th day, Kale put it straight back down. He did not mention it, and neither did anybody who saw him do it. Nessa took to reading the casualty lists out loud each morning so that nobody in the tents had to read them alone. Dax stopped making jokes for 4 days, which frightened the other 3 considerably more than the troll had. Then he started again, worse than before, and they let him. Standing up on the wall at the end of the 3rd week, Tavin counted the gaps in the roofs below him and got to 41. Every one of those houses had been full a month earlier, and he had watched the thing that emptied them die on the cobbles in front of him. It had not been enough. Finding him up there, Verena said nothing encouraging at all, which he was quietly grateful for. She told him the Crown had put a standing bounty on venom trolls and had not yet had to pay it out a second time. That was the part nobody in the city wanted to think about. So nobody in the city thought about it. Tavin thought about it constantly. Telling Verena first was the hardest of the 4 conversations he had spent 2 nights preparing for. He said that he was leaving Veskir and that he did not know when he would be coming back to it. Asking whether this was about the roofs, she got told that it was about the whole of it. A year of her training had taken him from useless to genuinely dangerous, and it had also shown him exactly where that road ended. He would never outfence her, and outfencing her was not going to stop the next troll anyway. What he had that nobody else in the kingdom had was a pair of eyes that could read a living plant. Somewhere out past the southern hills, there were things growing that no herbalist had ever put a name to. Listening all the way to the end, Verena did not interrupt him once. Then she said that he was right, which was not what he had spent 2 nights preparing for. She made him swear to come back and lose to her properly, and he swore it standing in the open street. Telling Ashvane was easier, because all 4 of them had seen it coming for a fortnight. Nessa had already drawn him a map of the southern road, with every well she knew of marked along it in red. Handing over a knife he swore was lucky, Dax neglected to mention whose pocket it had come out of first. Pressing 40 bandage rolls into his pack, Ren did not trust herself to say very much about anything. Kale walked him to the gate on his own legs, and it cost him a great deal more than he let anybody see. and Tavin let him do it anyway. He said only that Ashvane would still be a party of 4 on the day Tavin came back to it. Taking 2 days over the sword, Borik refused every single coin that was pressed on him for the work. The old smith said a blade for a herb boy had to be light enough to carry all day and still be there at the end of it. It came out plain and short, balanced so far back that it sat still on an open palm. Borik mentioned that Brenna had carried her first sword for 11 years before she finally broke it. Then he said her name again, quietly, the way people do when they have stopped expecting any news. Nobody in Veskir had seen her in a year and 2 months. Tavin had counted every week of it. Amberleaf was the last door, and Malin had the shutters open and the kettle already going when he got there. Knowing he was leaving since the morning he first asked her about southern soil, she had said absolutely nothing about it. Old elves do not need to be told things twice, and this one had never needed telling once. She made him list every herb he expected to find between Veskir and the southern mountains. He got 23 of them, and she told him flatly that the real number was 60. Going into the back room, she came out with something she had never shown him in a year of visits. It was a seed case of dark waxed wood, no longer than a finger, sealed over at both ends. Inside, packed in dry moss, sat a single seed the color of old ivory and about the size of a plum stone. Malin said she had cut it out of a dead tree in the far south when she was 90 years old, and that she had carried it ever since. In 200 years, she had never once been able to say what species it belonged to. Every test she knew came back saying the same impossible thing, which was that it was still alive. She had never planted it, because a seed you cannot name is a question you only get to ask once. Handing it across the counter, she told him that he would know the ground when he was standing on it. Leaving through the southern gate the next morning, he went out in the gray hour before the traders were awake, and nobody came to see him off. He had asked all 4 of them not to, and they had listened. The southern road carries wool going down and salt coming up, and it is busy for exactly 6 months of the year. Tavin walked it alone for 2 days and learned that a map with wells marked on it is worth more than a sword. Catching him up on the 3rd morning, a salt caravan of 19 wagons came grinding out of the dust behind him. The master was a heavy, careful man named Pell, who priced everything he looked at, including boys traveling on foot. He asked what a 15-year-old was doing walking south in a year like this one. Tavin said that he was a gatherer. Pell said gatherers rode in the back for 4 coppers and went back to counting barrels. Looking along the water casks lashed to the 2nd wagon, Tavin told him not to open the 3rd. Pell asked why, in the flat tone of a man deciding whether he was going to be angry about it later. That cask had been filled at a spring below a stand of pale flowering shrub about 2 days back down the road. Naming the shrub, Tavin explained that its roots bleed into groundwater for roughly a month after it flowers. Nobody dies of it. Every ox in the train would be down with cramps inside a day and a half, which for a salt caravan is worse. Opening the 3rd cask, Pell smelled nothing whatsoever and poured it out onto the road. He offered 2 silver a day and a place on the lead wagon, which was not the same job. Coming in at noon, the caravan scout looked at the new boy longer than was comfortable. Sable was somewhere near 30, brown and weathered, and she rode with a hunting hawk on a padded shoulder. She had gone ahead of caravans on this road for 11 years and had never lost a single wagon on it. Asking him one question about the shrub, she got an answer 3 sentences longer than she had wanted. It seemed to satisfy her because she did not speak to him again for 2 days. On the 3rd night, she sat down at his fire and asked what he was looking for. He told her the truth, which was rare plants, a missing woman, and a 3rd thing he could not name yet. Sable said that the 1st was easy and the 2nd was hard. The 3rd one, she said, generally finds you, and then she went to sleep without explaining that at all. The wagons made 9 miles a day, and Tavin spent every one of them reading the ground going past the wheels. He filled 2 collecting books in 11 days and paid for his own place on the wagon twice over in dried root. Riding up at the front, he learned that road the way he had once learned the shelves of the Healers Guild. Pell took to asking him things and then pretending he had known the answer all along. Sable taught him to read what she read, which was not plants at all, but the way the animals had been moving. A road with no birds on it means something, and it has never once meant anything good for the people walking it. On the 9th day out from the last town, the hawk would not go up. Standing in the stirrups for a long while, Sable said that the sky was empty in the wrong direction entirely. Tavin looked at the verge instead, because that was his half of the work, and he had learned to trust the splits. Bindweed grows along that whole stretch of road, and it winds in a spiral, and it always winds the same way round. Every plant along a full mile of it had wound itself the other way, which is not a thing that bindweed does. Kneeling at the verge, he pulled one up and found the root black at the tip and dry as burnt string. He put it in a jar instead of in his book. He said nothing to Pell that evening, and was still deciding why not when he fell asleep. By morning, the grass beside the wheel ruts crunched underfoot like frost, in a month that had no frost in it. Riding ahead, Sable came back early, which she had not once done in 11 days. There was a village 4 miles on, and its wheat was standing up perfectly straight and perfectly gray. Pell wanted to go around it, and the road did not go around it, and that was the whole of the discussion. Taven asked for 1 day. Sable said she would give him 1 day, and Pell found the matter settled. The village was called Hallow Ford, and 81 people had lived in it before the ground went wrong. They had been eating stored grain for 2 months and telling one another that it was simply a bad season. Reading their fields for an hour, Taven came back with the only true sentence anybody had said in that village. The wheat was not dead, and it was not sick, and either of those would have been considerably better news. Something was drinking it, slowly, from underneath. And it had been drinking a great deal longer than 2 months. Pell paid him off honestly and in full that evening, and took his 19 wagons around by the river road. Sable stayed, gave no reason, and Taven had the sense not to ask for one. Gray wheat is not the color of dead wheat, and that is the detail every person in Hallow Ford had missed. Dead wheat goes pale gold and falls over. Standing upright and holding its shape, this crop meant something was still holding it up. Cutting one stalk open along its whole length, Taven found the inside packed tight with fine black thread. The thread ran down the stem, through the root, and into the soil without thinning. It was not a fungus, and it was not a rot, because both of those spread outward, and this went straight down. Sable asked how far down, and he told her that this was the only question in the entire village worth asking. Digging a pit at the field's edge, they found threads at 4 feet thicker than a bootlace. At 6 feet, they stopped digging. The black had gone from thread to something closer to cable, and neither of them wanted to cut one. Hallow Ford had been founded on that ridge for the ore, and the ore had run out before the founder's grandchildren. Nobody had gone into the old workings in 90 years, and every child in the village knew exactly where the way in was. Tracing the cables east all afternoon, Taven walked a line that went straight toward the mine mouth. The gray stopped where the workings stopped, and not 1 field further. The head woman said the mine had been sealed twice, once for water and once for a boy who did not come out of it. Somebody had opened it that year, and had not been careful about hiding it. Fresh stone chips lay scattered in the grass below the adit, and nothing in a dead mine makes fresh chips. Finding boot prints in the clay, Sable said they were too broad for anybody in that village. Whatever wore them had been coming and going for months, and it had come rather more often than it went. Studying the prints for a while, she said only that they had not been made by anybody carrying nothing. Sitting with his back to the adit wall, Taven did the arithmetic he had been taught to do. The troll had been built, and anything built has to be built out of something. Ren had spent an hour after that battle explaining why her anti-heal magic had done precisely nothing to it. Whatever fed the creature had not been magic in any form she had ever been taught to counter. It had been alive, and it had been growing, and it had wanted feeding constantly and in quantity. 81 people's wheat is a great deal of feeding, and nobody misses a field the way they miss a body. Writing it all down badly, he used the back of his second collecting book that night. Then he wrote a second page addressed to Verena, in case somebody eventually came looking for him. Sable put the fire between them and the mine mouth, and slept with the hawk's jesses wrapped around her wrist. She woke him before dawn to say something had come out and gone back in. Going out at first light, Taven found the grass flattened in a track 4 feet across. The stems had not been trodden down, but drained, going gray along the entire width of it. Whatever made that track had not walked so much as passed, and everything underneath it had paid for the privilege. The village wanted them gone by then, which Taven thought entirely reasonable. People who have watched their fields die for 2 months do not particularly want a boy explaining why. The head woman gave them 4 days of bread, and asked them to seal the mine on their way out of the valley. Sable pointed out that they had no powder, no mason, and no particular skill at sealing anything at all. Sealing it would only move the problem. Following 1 cable west that morning, he found it ran under the road toward the next valley. Hallow Ford had never been the target, and that was by a considerable margin the worst part of it. It was simply the field that happened to be sitting on top of the thing while it went somewhere else. Naming it out loud made it real, and neither of them said very much for the rest of that morning. Sable asked plainly whether he meant to go down the mine, and he said he did. She asked what he thought he could do down there that a night company could not do a great deal better. A night company would take 3 weeks to arrive, and when it arrived, it would cut whatever it found. Cutting would do nothing whatsoever, because the thing was a root system, And roots do not care about being cut. What kills a root is not a blade, but the right poison put in at the right depth and left there. He had 11 poisons in his pack, and no idea at all which of them would work on something with no name. Sable said that this was a plan with a hole through the middle of it, wide enough to ride a horse through. Agreeing completely, Tavin began laying every jar he owned out along a flat stone in order of how badly it killed things. He tested each one on a length of black cable pulled up out of the pit at the field's edge that morning. 9 of the 11 did precisely nothing at all. The 10th made the cable swell and grow faster, and he poured the rest of that jar out onto bare rock. The 11th was a paralysis draft, bought in Veskir for 2 silver. It did not kill the cable either, but for a count of 40, the black inside it stopped moving entirely. 40 seconds is not a cure, and 40 seconds is a very great deal more than nothing at all. Hacking every jar he had left, Tavin walked up to the mine mouth an hour before noon. The adit ran level for 80 paces and then began to drop, and the air changed at the turn. It did not smell like a mine. A mine smells of wet stone and old iron, and nothing else. And this smelled like a greenhouse in high summer. There had been frost on the grass that morning, and Tavin stood at the turn for a while thinking about that. Sable went first with the lamp, having been underground more times than he had. The hawk stayed up at the mouth, and it screamed twice as they went down, and then it stopped screaming. At the first junction, the walls were furred over with something soft and dark that gave underfoot. Putting his hand flat against it, Tavin told her it was root hair, on a scale that had no business existing anywhere. 90 years of nothing should have left that mine bone dry, and every surface in it was faintly warm. Following the warmest wall, they took the left gallery down toward the old flooded level. The water was gone, which the headwoman had sworn was impossible, and the floor of it was dry, black fiber. Something had drunk an entire flooded mine level in less than a year. Counting his paces out of habit, Tavin made it 240 from the entrance to the chamber. The old ore chamber had been cut wide enough for 6 men to swing picks abreast in it. Filling it now, floor to roof, was a single mass of pale gray growth with the texture of wet rope. It had no shape that meant anything. It moved slightly, and it was not breathing. Threads left it in every direction, into the walls and the floor and away along all 4 galleries. One of them, thicker than Tavin's arm, ran west out of the chamber toward the next valley. Sable said one word about that, and it was not a word she would have used in front of the village. Set into the mass at about the height of a man's chest was something that did not belong to it. It was a casket of dark metal the length of a forearm, and the growth came out of it and not the other way round. The metal was clean and unpitted, and stamped along one edge with a mark that Tavin had seen once before. The venom troll had carried it burned into the hide of its left shoulder, and Garrick had named it on the road home. This was army work, planted deliberately, in a dead mine underneath a village nobody would ever come looking at. Standing in front of it, Tavin understood that he was looking at a farm and not at a monster. They were not raising trolls somewhere else and marching them here. They were growing the feed first, and they had been growing it patiently, and nobody had noticed for a year. Asking him how long, she got a count of the pale bands ringing out from the casket. There were 14. If one band was 1 month, then the thing had been down here since before he had ever left Veskir. Tavin got out the paralysis draft and understood exactly how little 2 silver had actually bought him. He had 1 bottle, 40 seconds of 1 bottle, and a chamber the size of a barn to spin them in. Sable said the obvious thing, which was that they should walk out and ride hard for the nearest garrison. He agreed with every word and then explained why they were not doing that. The thread running west had grown while they stood there, and he could see how far it had already reached. Whatever this thing did next, it would do in the next valley, and there was a town of 4,000 in it. He asked for 11 minutes and the lamp, and she handed him both. Working at the base of the mass, he cut a channel down to where the growth met the casket metal. The pale rope parted easily under the little sword, which told him that it was not defending itself. It had never needed to. Nothing that had ever met this thing had known what it was looking at, including him, until that afternoon. Pouring the entire draft into the channel, Tavin got it as close to the metal as his arm would reach. The count of 40 started, the whole mass stopped moving, and the warmth went out of the walls around them. He did not attack the growth, because the growth was a crop, and crops grow back. Instead, he put both hands on the casket and pulled it bodily out of the frozen mass. It came free with a sound like a boot leaving mud, and it weighed considerably less than he had expected. Holding the lamp up, Sable counted out loud, and she had already reached 31. Running the gallery back was uphill, and the casket in his arms had begun to grow warm again. At 39, the mass behind them started moving, and it had learned something in the interval. Every thread in that chamber pulled toward the gallery mouth at once, and the roof came down behind them. They went up the last 80 paces in complete darkness, because the lamp had gone when the roof did. Coming out of the attic at a dead run, Tavin fell over in the grass and did not get up for some time. The hawk came down on the sable's arm and would not settle, and its feathers stayed up for an hour afterward. Behind them, the hillside sank about a foot along a line running exactly west, and then it stopped sinking. The casket lay in the grass and put out a single pale thread, and Tavin cut it off flush at the metal. It put out another one somewhere else, and he cut that off as well, and then he sat and watched it. Sable asked whether he intended to carry that thing, and he said he intended to carry it a very long way. Somebody in the kingdom needed to be shown a live one, because a dead one proves nothing to anybody. Packing it in the seed case's dry moss, he sealed the whole lot into a salt jar. Hallow Ford's wheat never came back, because the field had been drunk, and drunk fields stay drunk. What did happen is that the gray stopped spreading west, and by the third day, every soul in the village could see it. The head woman gave them the only horse in Hallow Ford, and would not hear a single word about taking it back. The next valley down was wide and green and entirely normal, which was the first thing that felt wrong about it. A thread the thickness of a man's arm had been growing toward it for 14 months and had reached nothing. Walking the whole eastern edge, Tavin did not find so much as a single pale leaf. Finding the reason on the second afternoon, Sable pointed to a line cut 400 paces into the turf. Somebody had dug a trench 2 feet deep across the entire width of the valley mouth and filled it with salt and ash. It was old work, a year of it at least, redone in the places where the winter rains had washed it out. Nobody digs 400 paces of trench by accident. Nobody digs it twice unless they know exactly what they are digging it against and have no help. Following the trench north, they came on a stone shepherd's hut with its roof patched in 3 different colors. There was a fire in it that had been lit that morning, and a sword leaning beside the door that Tavin knew. He had watched that sword come off a woman's back in a mountain camp when he was 15 years old. Coming round the side of the hut with an armful of firewood, Brenna stopped dead. She had lost a great deal of weight, and her copper hair had gone half gray at both temples. Neither spoke long enough that Sable took the horse elsewhere. Then Brenna dropped the firewood and hit him in the shoulder, hard enough to put him on the ground. She asked what in the world he thought he was doing 400 miles south of where he belonged. Tavin said that he had come looking for her. She told him that this had been extremely stupid, and then she sat down on the step and put her head in her hands. Brenna had left Veskir 14 months earlier on a contract that turned out not to exist. The man who hired her wanted a mine looked at, 2 valleys east of here, and he had paid half of it in advance. She found what was in it, understood about 1/10 of what she was looking at, and burned the entrance behind her. Waiting outside when she came up, the man who hired her had not been a man at all. Explaining it badly, she said that it had worn a face and had talked to her the entire way down the road. It asked her questions about Veskir for 2 days and never once asked her anything at all about herself. When she stopped answering, it stopped pretending, and the fight afterward lasted about a minute and a half. She won, in the sense that she was alive and it was not, and she did not use the word won. Pulling her left sleeve up to the shoulder, Brenna showed the pair of them exactly what winning had cost. The skin from her wrist right up to her collarbone was traced underneath with fine black lines that showed through it. They were not veins and they were not a scar. And for 6 months, they had been perfectly still. In the last 8 weeks, they had moved a thumb's width, and she had started counting. Tavin looked at her arm for a long time, and then asked her one question about a plant. He wanted to know whether the black lines went paler when she was cold. She said that they did, and something in his face changed. It meant that this was not a wound behaving like a wound, and both of them already knew what it was behaving like. Brenna had spent 14 months doing the only useful thing she could think of, which was digging trenches. There were 9 of them now, and she had walked between them all winter. Working it out alone, she had learned that the growth cannot cross salted ground and will simply go around instead. Going around costed months, and months were the only thing she had ever found any way of taking from it. Nobody had helped her, because she had told nobody, because she did not know who the face had been talking to. A creature that spends 2 days asking about a city is not doing it for its own entertainment. She had not written north in 14 months in case the letter was the thing that told it where to look. Tavin said that this was the stupidest, brave thing he had ever heard of anybody doing. Brenna said she had learned it from a 15-year-old who once hired the worst party in Veskir. Showing her the salt jar took some time because she did not believe a word of it until he opened the lid. The casket put out a thread while she was holding it, and she set it down and stepped back from it. She had seen that mark on the metal before. on the shoulder of the thing that had worn a face. Asking what he intended to do with it, Brenna got told that he was carrying it north. She told him north was 400 miles, and that her arm had about 8 weeks left at the current rate. Sable said the thing neither of them was going to say, which was that these were two different problems. The casket needed a garrison, and Brenna needed something nobody in that valley had. Taven spent the evening going through his pack and laying every jar he owned out across the hut floor. 11 poisons, 9 tonics, 40 bandage rolls, and 1 waxed case never opened. Nothing in that row had ever been made for anything remotely like the lines under Brenna's skin. Malin could have named 6 things that might have helped, and Malin was 400 miles behind him. Brenna told him to stop, in the flat voice she used for orders. Knowing what this was since the 8th week, she had already made her peace with it. Then she said she wanted to spend whatever was left putting salt in the ground and not lying in a bed. Taven asked whether she remembered carrying him down Mount Colvin on her back. She said of course she did, and that he had weighed nothing, and still did. She had not asked him that day whether he wanted to be carried. Brenna laughed for the first time since he had arrived, and it turned into a cough about halfway through. Going out to see to the horse, Sable stayed out considerably longer than the horse required. Taven sat by the fire with a waxed case in both hands and thought about a shop 400 miles north. Malin had told him he would know the ground when he was standing on it, and he had not believed her. He had assumed that she meant soil. Opening the case at midnight, he found the seed exactly as she had shown him, ivory and perfectly still. A seed you cannot name is a question you only get to ask once, and Malin had said so in as many words. Sitting with it in his palm until the fire burned down, Taven asked nobody's permission. He did not plant it in the ground because the ground was not the thing being eaten. Waking Brenna at the worst hour of the night, he told her exactly what he was about to try. She said no. She said it 3 separate times in 3 different ways, and the last one was not an order, but a request. He pointed out that she had never once asked him whether he wanted to be carried down a mountain. Calling it a filthy argument, Brenna put her left arm out flat on the table. Holding the lamp, Sable asked whether he had ever done anything like this before. Nobody had ever done this before, which was the entire point of the object, and he said so out loud. Cutting the seed in half along its length, he found it parted like green wood. Inside it was wet and pale, and it smelled precisely like the air in the mine had smelled. How was the thing he had not expected? And he understood what it meant. About 4 seconds too late. The seed and the growth under Hollow Ford were the same order of living thing, and always had been. Malin had cut it out of a dead tree in the far south, 200 years before any of this began. Whatever the Demon King's people were planting now, they had not invented it, and they had only found it. Setting the cut face against the black lines at Brenna's wrist, Taven held it there and waited. For a count of 10, absolutely nothing happened, and he had time to feel extremely foolish about all of it. Then the seed took hold of her arm, and Brenna came off the bench, and Sable put her whole weight across her shoulders. Pulling toward the seed, the black lines moved as iron filings moved toward a magnet. It drank for about 1.5 minutes. Those were the longest 90 seconds of Taven's life, and he had already had a fairly eventful 2 months. The lines went back down the arm, into the wrist, and out of her altogether. The seed blackened from the cut face outward, and swelled until the 2 halves would no longer have fitted together. Brenna's arm was clean and pale from the wrist to the collarbone, and she could not feel any part of it below the elbow. That was the first price, and he had expected there to be a price, and he had expected the whole of it to be hers. The second price arrived about 4 seconds later, while he was still holding both black halves in his bare hands. They put out threads of their own, and the threads went into his palms, rather than down into the table he was leaning on. Having the knife out before he did, Sable got told not to cut, in a voice he did not recognize. It did not hurt. That was the part that frightened him, because every other thing that had happened that night had. The threads went in about 1 inch and stopped, and the black drained out of the seed halves and up them. What was left in his hands was 2 pieces of ordinary pale wood, and they crumbled when he closed his fists. The lines under his own skin ran from both palms to just past both wrists, and then they simply stopped, as if drawn there. They were fine and dark, and unlike Brenna's, they did not move at all over the days that followed. Brenna wanted his hands off at the wrist that night, and was entirely serious. He told her the black had gone in on purpose and stopped on purpose, and that a wound does neither. Waking on the second morning, he knew where every plant within 100 paces of the hut was standing. He had not looked out of the window, and he could have drawn the whole slope from his bed. It was not sight, and it was not smell, and the closest word anybody had for it was hearing. Walking out into the valley, he found that Brenna's trenches were audible from 1/4 mile away. Salted ground is silence. A live field is a low, steady noise, and he had been deaf to all of it his whole life. Asking what it was like, Sable got told the ground had always been talking. The cost showed itself on the fourth day, when he tried to conjure herbs the way he always had. Verdant Eye had always let him pull 3 cheap plants out of nothing at all before he collapsed. He made one. It came up black-veined and rotted through in his hand inside about a minute, and he sat down hard. Trying 11 more times across 2 days, he got 11 more of the same result. Whatever he had traded away the making, and he had kept and enlarged the reading. Brenna asked whether he would do it again, and he said yes without thinking. Then he went and sat behind the hut, and did not speak to anybody for the rest of that afternoon. Making plants out of nothing was the trick that had got him out of the Healers Guild and into an actual life of his own. It had bought his first contract, his first sword, and every single thing that came after both of them. He had given it away in the dark for a woman's arm, and he had not asked one question first. Some days later, Sable said that this was the first genuinely grown-up thing she had watched him do. Brenna could not feel her left hand, and could hold a sword in it if she watched it while she did. That was the second price. It was permanent, and she never once mentioned it in front of him. He knew anyway, because he could hear the difference in how she walked across a living field, and he never once said so. Climbing the ridge on the 6th day, he listened to the whole valley from the top. The trench line was silent. The fields were a steady, low noise, and one place was neither of those. 4 miles south, under a stand of oak, something was drinking, and it was not on Brenna's map at all. Counting the ones he could hear from a single ridge, Tavin got as far as 14 before he stopped counting. Coming down out of the hills into Westmarch on a market day, they had 1 horse, 1 hawk, and a salt jar. It was a wool town of 4,000 people, and every one of them was buying and selling perfectly normally. Brenna had not been in a town in 14 months and did not care for the noise. Selling 11 kinds of dried root in under an hour, Tavin got twice what they were worth. Westmarch had no herbalist and no apothecary. It had a barber who set bones on the 2nd Tuesday of every month, and a great deal of confidence in him. The nearest garrison was 11 days east, and the nearest person who could read the mark on that casket was further. Making the case for riding east with it, Sable made it well, and then made it a second time. Tavin said that 11 days east and 11 days back was 22 days of the thing under the oaks growing. Brenna said the sentence that ended it, which was that they did not all have to go. Knowing the Eastern Road, she had a hawk, a horse, and 11 years of never losing a wagon. Taking the salt jar and both collecting books, she also took his page for Verena. Standing in the road with the jar strapped down under her saddle, she made him say the whole thing through twice. 14 sites and not 9. And one of them within 4 miles of a town of 4,000 people. She said that she would put it into the hands of somebody who could read it, or she would not stop writing. Then she said that if he was dead by the time she got back, she would consider the entire journey wasted. Watching her until the road turned took a considerable while on that open country. The smith in Westmarch was a thin, nervous man who had never made anything more dangerous than a gate hinge. He did not want a weapon from him, and explaining that properly took most of an afternoon. What he wanted was 80 feet of thin iron pipe, drilled along its length, in sections that screwed together. Bork would have understood it inside 1 sentence, and this man got there eventually and did honest work. A root system cannot usefully be cut and cannot be burned, and both of those had already been established. What it can be is fed. The only question left was what to feed it, and how far down to put the feeding, and neither was in any book. Paralysis had bought 40 seconds in the mine, and it had bought them at the metal and not at the growth. Spending 9 days in a rented shed, Tavin worked out what a 14-month growth does when it meets salt. Salt stops it, which was Brenna's entire discovery, and stopping is not remotely the same thing as killing. Then he tried salt mixed with the 11th draft, and the pale rope in his test jar went quiet for an hour. He tried it again at 4 times the strength. The sample died, and it stayed dead for 6 days, and he checked it every one. It was the first thing anybody had made that killed the growth. Asking the practical question, Brenna wanted to know how much a 4-mile site would take. The answer was about 11 barrels, and Westmarch was a wool town, and 11 barrels was a month of wages. Selling the horse covered 2, and his root money another 3. The head woman of Hallow Ford sent a rider after them with a purse that village could not possibly afford. Brenna sold the sword she had carried since before Tavin was born, and she did not discuss it with anybody. He found out afterward from the smith and did not raise it for 2 days. She said a sword she could not feel her hand on had already been sold. The pipe went into the ground under the oaks in 11 screwed sections over the course of 1 long night at the end of autumn. Listening the whole way down, Tavin could tell where the growth was to within about a foot. That was the thing no trench could ever do, and it was precisely what he had bought with his making. Putting 4 barrels in before dawn, they heard the noise under the oaks go from steady to broken. By the 7th barrel it had stopped, and the ground under that stand was silent for the first time in a year. The oaks themselves died within the month, and he had known that they would. Nobody in West March ever learned what was done 4 miles south of it. Brenna wrote it all down on the back of her map, badly, because her left hand still would not hold a pen. There were 13 sites left on it, and neither of them believed for a moment that 13 was the real number. The next one south sat under an entire valley, according to what he had heard from the top of the ridge. It was 3 days' walk. They had 2 barrels of the mixture, and they needed something closer to 20. Brenna said that they were going to go and look at it anyway, on the grounds that looking costs nothing. Taven said that this was the stupidest, brave thing he had ever heard of anybody doing. They went south on foot on the first cold morning of the year, and neither of them mentioned Veskir once. The valley was called Ashenwold on Brenna's map, and 900 people had lived in it at the last count. They smelled it from the pass above, which is not a thing a valley of that size has any business doing. Standing at the top, Taven heard it before he had finished climbing far enough to be able to see it. Every site he had listened to until then had been a low, steady drinking underneath a living field. This one was underneath nothing, because nothing was left alive on top of it. 4 miles of valley floor lay gray from one wall to the other, and every stalk of the gray was standing perfectly upright. What had been wheat and orchard and hedge and wood was still exactly where it had grown, and all of it was rope. Nothing moved down there except a slow shift across the surface, like wind on water with no wind in it. Brenna said there had been a village at the ford and asked if he could hear it. Listening for a long time, Taven told her the truth, which was that he could hear nothing alive. 900 is a number you cannot use while standing on a ridge. Sitting down in the heather, he put both hands over his ears, which did not help. Brenna gave him 4 minutes, then made him get up and look properly. She said he had come 400 miles to find out how big it was, and here it was, being big. They went down the eastern wall at dusk and got to within half a mile of the valley floor. Growth on that scale does not notice 2 people, in the same way that a field does not notice mice. There had been a mill at the ford, and the wheel of it was still turning, driven by nothing at all. Counting the pale bands ringing out from the middle of the valley, Taven got to 31 of them. That put the planting more than 2 years before Hallow Ford, which made Hallow Ford the young one. Ashenwald had never been a site, and calling it one had been the last thing he had got wrong about any of it. It was the first, and everything he had walked through for 2 months had been growing outward from here. Something stood at the center of it, out on the mill road, and it had been standing there a while. It was the height of a tall man and shaped almost exactly like one, and it was not one. Brenna went completely still beside him and said that this was the face that had hired her. It wore no face any longer, and whatever was underneath had never needed one. Threads left it in every direction across the whole 4 miles of valley floor, and the thing was not standing on the growth. It stood in it, the way a stem stands in a field, and every rope in Ashenwald ran back to where it stood. 2 years of 900 people's fields had gone into the thing on the mill road below them. Taven understood, far too late and all at once, that the caskets had never been the plant. The caskets were seeds, and every mine and every oak stand and every drump gray field had been a sowing. This was what the crop was for. There was exactly one of these that he knew about, and he had no reason at all to believe it was the only one. Asking him quietly how many barrels it would take, Brenna got no answer for a while. The answer was that there was no number, because what they were looking at was no longer a root system. Then the figure on the mill road turned around, unhurried, and looked directly up at the eastern wall. Half a mile of dusk and heather lay between them, and there was no possible way for it to have seen them. Brenna's hand went to a sword she had sold in Westmarch 9 days earlier, and closed on nothing at all. It raised one arm, the way a man does when he recognizes somebody at a distance and wants to be certain. Then it said his name. It said Taven Cress across half a mile of dead valley, in a perfectly ordinary speaking voice. It said it the way Mei Lin said it, and that was by a wide margin the worst part of the whole evening. Nobody in 400 miles of southern country had ever been told that name except 3 people. One was riding east with a salt jar, and one stood on the ridge beside him. The third was 200 years old, 400 miles north, behind a counter in Veskir. Getting him off the ridge and into the rocks, Brenna moved before he had worked out what it meant. They ran 2 miles along the eastern wall in the dark, and neither of them looked back at the valley once. Nothing followed them. That was somehow worse than being followed, and both of them knew it. A thing that does not chase you is a thing that does not need to. and they walked the rest of the night. Stopping at dawn 11 miles north, they had 2 barrels, 1 sword between them, and no plan at all. Brenna said Sable was 9 days east, and a garrison 11 days beyond that. The garrison would arrive at a valley, not a monster, and it would cut. Cutting does nothing, and he had known that since a mine shaft under Hollow Ford, and nobody would listen. Sitting on a cold rock with black lines under both wrists, he did the arithmetic one more time. One person alive had held that seed for 200 years and had never once planted it, and she was north. He had 400 miles to walk, a name that something in the south already knew, and no time at all.